His head felt as if someone had driven a red-hot nail into the back of his skull. Ethan Verkin opened his eyes and saw a stone vault above him, the Altar of Awakening. 300 people stood around it in an amphitheater, looking down at him. The tablet above the altar pulsed with red light. The letters slowly came into view. Class, Camp Cook. Rank, F. Passive abilities, taste of truth, harmony of ingredients. The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then 300 throats burst into laughter at once, and the sound made the colorful stained glass windows beneath the ceiling tremble. Ethan lay on the cold stone and stared at the ceiling. He knew what umami was. He knew at exactly 57 degrees the egg white turns to silk. He knew how to draw out the collagen in broth after 8 hours of simmering. For 13 years, he'd fed people at a Michelin-starred restaurant in Tokyo and died of a stroke right at the stove while finishing the sauce for table number 4. The sauce, by the way, turned out perfect. And now he lay in the body of a 16-year-old malnourished boy on the stone floor of a foreign world. And 300 future heroes of the Kingdom of Valand were laughing at him so hard that some of them were in tears. Camp Cook. Rank F. Meat for the front. Ethan sat down. He wiped someone's spit off his cheek. And he smiled to himself, because he knew one thing that none of these laughing idiots knew. Food is a weapon. Caspian Vale stood in the front row, tall, broad-shouldered, shoulder-length golden hair. 10 minutes ago, the tablet above his head had displayed Holy Swordsman, rank S. The hall erupted in applause. The girls in the front rows squealed. Rector Holven personally shook his hand. And now Caspian was walking down the steps toward the altar, holding a bowl of soup from the cafeteria. He approached Ethan, looked down at him, and poured the soup over his head. The liquid ran down his hair, over his face, down his neck and behind his collar. It was warm, greasy, oversalted. Ethan assessed it instinctively. The broth had been simmered on the bones for no more than 20 minutes, 4 times the normal amount of salt. The meat was gray and rubbery. The vegetables were overcooked to a mushy consistency. At the Ure restaurant, he would have fired the chef on the spot for soup like this. Caspian smirked and said the chef should get used to the smell of food. The dining room burst into laughter again. Ethan wiped his face with his sleeve. He looked at Caspian. In his past life, he'd seen people like this. They'd come to the restaurant in groups of 6. They'd order the most expensive items. They snapped their fingers at the waiters. They sent dishes back without even tasting them. Ethan had served them for 13 years. He smiled. He curtsied. And he hated every single one of them. But here, he wasn't a waiter. Here, he was a Class F chef in a world where class determined everything. The right to bear a sword, the right to study, the right to look a noblewoman in the eye. And F meant only one thing: expendable. Celeste was standing in the 4th row. Ethan spotted her right away. For 7 years, he'd carried her textbooks. For 7 years, she had been the only person at this academy who spoke to the youngest son of the impoverished Baron Verkin. The only person who didn't beat him for his weak aura. She stood next to Caspian. Her tablet glowed gold. The Blade of the Morning Dawn, rank A, Holy Night. Caspian's twin star. She looked away, chin up, lips pressed into a thin line. She wasn't laughing. But she didn't speak up either. Ethan remembered this. Not with anger, with weariness. In a past life, he had lost his wife in exactly the same way. She hadn't left because she had fallen out of love. She had left because he spent 18 hours a day at the stove while she stood by the closed door of their apartment and waited. People don't betray. People get tired of waiting. Rector Holven stepped up to the lectern. A tall, gaunt old man in a robe with silver embroidery. His face was like dried parchment. His eyes were like 2 stones at the bottom of a well. He read the order aloud. Ethan Verkin, Class, Camp Cook, Rank, F, to be assigned to the 7th Penal Detachment, Northern Border, Active Combat Zone, immediately. The hall fell silent. Not out of sympathy, out of boredom. Penal detachments were a meat grinder. Everyone knew that. The Crimson Tide had been creeping up from the north for half a year, an army of demons under the command of Lord Isgarna. The penal detachments held the border, a rabble, the condemned, classes F and D. 200 men a week, acceptable losses. That's what the generals write in their reports. The elite don't go to the border. The elite are preparing for the real war that will happen in a year, when the last wall falls. Meanwhile, in the north, those no one cares about are dying, and an F-rank cook among them is doubly unworthy of pity. Ethan stood up. His knees were shaking. The 16-year-old boy's body was frail, thin arms, sunken chest. His ribs showed through his shirt. Baron Verkin didn't spend money on his youngest son. His older brother took his share of the food at dinner. His mother had died in childbirth. His father wouldn't look him in the eye. 7 years at the academy on bread and water, and now the final test. Ethan walked across the hall toward the exit, wet, smelly, with soup residue in his hair. 300 pairs of eyes watched him go. Someone threw an apple core after him. Someone whistled. He didn't turn around. He stopped at the door. He looked at his hands, slender fingers, not a single callus. In his past life, his hands had been covered in burns and cuts. 13 years at the stove. A chef's hands are his main tool. These hands don't remember anything yet, but his mind remembers everything. 412 recipes, cooking temperatures for 73 types of protein, the principles of fermentation, the sous vide technique, working with acids and alkalis, the balance of the 5 flavors, molecular cuisine. All of this lay in his memory, neatly arranged on shelves like spices in the chef's pantry. And then there was the system, the taste of truth, the harmony of ingredients. He didn't yet understand what that meant, but he could feel it. Something inside him hummed quietly and steadily, like an oven preheating. He stepped out of the dining room. The door closed behind him. The laughter remained inside. Outside it was quiet. The sun, wind, the scent of mown grass from the academic field, and another scent. Ethan sniffed. Thyme. Wild thyme grew in the cracks between the stones of the path. At Ure's restaurant, he'd paid $12 for a bunch. Here it grew underfoot like a weed. Ethan bent down and plucked a sprig. He rubbed it between his fingers. He sniffed it. And then a translucent panel appeared before his eyes. Taste of truth activated. Object. Wild mountain thyme. Composition. Thymol 48%. Carvacrol 22%. Linalool 11%. Hidden property. When combined with Class C meat or higher, it enhances the eater's muscle regeneration by 12% for 4 hours. Recommended cooking temperature, 74 degrees. Time, 40 minutes. Ethan froze. He reread it. He reread it again. Muscle regeneration, 12%. From thyme, from the weed under his feet. He started laughing, quietly, then louder, then so hard that he doubled over and braced his hands against his knees. A student walking by tapped his temple with a finger and kept walking. Ethan straightened up. He wiped his eyes. He looked at the sprig of thyme in his fingers. In this world, meat is salted with one kind of salt and roasted until charred. Soup is simmered for 20 minutes. Vegetables are boiled until they turn into a gray mush. 400 years of cooking, and not a single archivist had ever considered that food could level you up. Because here, you level up through combat, through blood, through risk, through death. But he knew another way. The penal squad, 7 men, the border, demons, 30 days until the inspection. Death in 2 months, according to the statistics. Ethan put some time in his pocket. Let's start with dinner. The wagon had been jolting along the bumpy road for 4 hours now. The driver was a fat, red-faced man with a beard down to his waist. He hadn't said a word to Ethan the entire time they'd been traveling. He just grunted when he saw the assignment slip and shook his head. 2 escort soldiers sat next to Ethan on the wagon. Both were rank D. Both looked at him as if he were a corpse being taken to his grave. One of them told the other he was betting 3 copper coins on a week. The other replied that he was betting 5 on 3 days. They laughed. Ethan remained silent. He stared at the roadside and counted the plants. Over the course of the 4-hour journey, he counted 11 species of herbs that he recognized by their appearance from his past life. Wild sorrel, stinging nettle, dandelion, plantain, burdock. There were 6 more species he didn't know, but they drew his gaze like a magnet. Something inside him told him they were important. Ethan asked the driver to stop. The driver looked at him as if he were crazy. One of the soldiers said the cook had decided to run away. The second said he should run and die in the woods. Ethan jumped off the wagon, walked to the roadside, and plucked a bunch of unfamiliar grass with silvery leaves. Taste of truth activated. Object, silver moonwort, endemic to the northern foothills. Composition, plant-based arginine 34%, selenium compounds 12%. Hidden property. When properly fermented for 72 hours, it grants the consumer a 20% increase in cold resistance for 8 hours. Toxic when raw. Ethan put the bunch in his bag. The soldiers exchanged glances. One said that the cook was gathering herbs for soup. They both laughed again. Over the next hour, Ethan stopped the cart 4 more times. He gathered a handful of dark berries that the system identified as wolfroot, poisonous when raw. When cooked in an acidic environment, they grant a +9 bonus to night vision for 6 hours. He found a mushroom spider mushroom under the roots of an old oak tree. The locals consider it a deadly poison. The taste of truth revealed that after simmering for 3 hours at 60 degrees, the poison breaks down completely, and the mushroom grants a +15 bonus to night vision and a +8 bonus to reaction. Ethan carefully cut off the mushroom with a knife he'd borrowed from the coachman. These weren't his hands. They were weak, clumsy. His fingers wouldn't obey him as they should. In his past life, he could slice an onion into perfect rings with his eyes closed. Here, he nearly cut himself while peeling the skin off the mushroom. Never mind. His hands will get used to it. Muscle memory is a learned skill. The mind remembers everything. The rest will catch up. The soldier on the left pulled out a flask and took a swig. Then he handed it to Ethan. He said the guy should drink while he still could. At the border, water is rationed, and it smells like rotten eggs. Ethan took the canteen. He raised it to his lips. He paused. The taste of truth activated without a prompt. The panel flashed red. Object, spring water, impurity, belladonna extract, concentration, enough to stop the heart in 4 hours for a person weighing 50 kilograms. Ethan froze. He looked at the soldier. The soldier was smiling, a normal, friendly smile. Nothing suspicious, just a kind guy sharing water with a condemned man. Ethan lowered the canteen. He said he didn't want to drink. He handed it back. The soldier shrugged and put the canteen away. Ethan sat back down on the cart and began to think. Who wanted to prevent him from reaching the border? Class F. Cook. Who could he possibly be a threat to? The answer came a minute later. Rector Holven. He didn't just send Ethan to the penal detachment. He sent him to die on the road. Why? The youngest son of Baron Verken. Nobody. Nothing. Who cares? Unless the rector knows something about the camp cook class that Ethan himself doesn't know. Unless this class isn't as simple as it seems. A line from the system panel flashed before his eyes, the one he'd caught out of the corner of his eye on the altar, but hadn't had time to read. Hidden. True class. Locked. Unlock condition. Earn 1,000 recognition points. Current total, 0. 1,000 points. He didn't even know how they were counted, but someone did. Someone knew that a boy with the cook class could become something greater, and that someone wanted for the boy to die before he found out for himself. A system panel popped up before his eyes. Poisoning attempt detected and prevented. Plus 10 recognition points. Current total, 10 out of 1,000. Ethan blinked. 10 points for not dying. An interesting start. The wagon emerged from the forest into an open space. Ethan saw the border. A gray line of fortifications stretched along the mountain ridge from one end of the horizon to the other. A wall of wood and stone 3 times a man's height. charred in places, collapsed in others, and some patched up with sandbags. Beyond the wall to the north lay the territory of the Crimson Tide. Even from here, 5 kilometers away, Ethan could see that the sky above the mountains was a different color. Not gray and not blue. Reddish, like an old bruise. The air smelled of smoke and something sour. The wagon turned right and along the wall. 20 minutes later, the driver stopped at a gate made of rusty iron. A sign hung above the gate. 7th Penal Detachment. The letters had been carved with a knife directly into the metal. A man stepped out of the gate. Tall, thin, gray hair pulled back into a ponytail. His left eye was covered with a patch. His right eye looked as if he were taking aim to fire a shot. A scar ran from his temple to his chin, chainmail with holes. A sword at his hip in a scabbard wrapped in rags. Captain Dorn, a veteran, 12 years on the border, 3 penal battalions before that. All 3 had been wiped out. Dorn walked over to the wagon. He looked at Ethan. He looked at the assignment slip. He looked at Ethan again. He told him not to unload the cargo. He'd be dead in a week anyway. Ethan jumped down from the wagon. The bag of herbs was slung over his shoulder. The driver turned the horses around and rode off without saying goodbye. The escort soldiers had left even earlier, while the wagon was still at the gate. Even they didn't want to linger near the 7th Detachment. Ethan entered the campgrounds. The courtyard was 30 by 30 paces. 3 barracks made of gray stone. One was leaning so far that it was propped up with a log. A well in the center. A weapons rack against the wall. On it were 4 spears and 2 swords. All rusty. People were sitting against the wall of the barracks. Ethan counted them. 6 people. 7 counting Dorn. Everyone was looking at him. No one stood up. A woman with short black hair and a bow slung across her back was sitting on a crate, cleaning the arrowheads. She looked up. Gray eyes, pressed lips, a scar on her right cheekbone. She pulled an arrow from her quiver. She drew the bowstring. She fired. The arrow whizzed past 10 centimeters from Ethan's right ear and lodged itself in the goalpost behind him. Lyra Voss, the Thorn Archer. Rank D. She said it was for good luck. Ethan didn't flinch. Not because he was brave. It was because, in a past life, a pressure cooker had once exploded half a meter from his face, and ever since then, his reflexes to sudden loud noises had simply burned out. He looked at the arrow in the post. He looked at Lyra. He nodded. He scanned the others. A large man with a bandaged shoulder lay on the ground against the wall. His face was ashen. His lips were chapped. A dark green stain was spreading beneath the bandage. Poisoning. Next to him sat a girl in a white cloak with her hands on his chest. A faint glow of mana. A healer. Hannah Reed, rank C. She was trying to heal him, but the glow flickered and faded. She didn't have enough mana. A skinny girl with pointed ears hidden under her hood sat on the roof of the barracks, swinging her legs. May, half-blood, scout. She waved at Ethan and smiled. The only person in the camp who had smiled at him. A broad-shouldered soldier with an axe stood by the well, rank D. Next to him was a guy no older than Ethan, holding a spear longer than he was, rank E. And lastly, a small figure in the corner of the yard. A girl of about 15. She was sitting on the ground, hugging her knees and staring into space. Her eyes were huge and empty. Yuki, the mute cook. She didn't look at Ethan. She wasn't looking at anyone at all. Ethan turned to Dorn. He asked where the kitchen was. Dorn grimaced. He pointed to the 3rd barrack, the one propped up with a log. Ethan walked over there. He opened the door. The kitchen. The kitchen was hell. Not that glamorous hell from cooking shows where everything sparkles and the chef yells at the interns. Real hell. A rusty pot on a stone hearth. The hearth was cracked and smoking. The chimney was clogged with soot. A wooden table covered with a layer of grease so thick that a knife stuck into it and stood upright. 3 clay bowls. one with a crack. One knife, dull. A cutting board made from a piece of wood that, was once part of a door. A meat hook on the wall, empty. A pantry in the corner. Ethan opened the pantry door. The smell hit his nose so hard that he recoiled. Mold, rot, sour grain. 3 sacks stood on the shelves. One with stale bread covered in green spots. One with rice. Ethan reached into the sack and pulled out a handful. Black rice. Not the usual black rice from China that he'd used in Ure for rice puddings. A different kind. The grains were larger and had a reddish tinge. The taste of truth activated. Object: rice from the demonic lands, cultivated in the Crimson Tide Zone. Composition: carbohydrates 62%, protein 14%. Hidden property: plus 8% resistance to dark magic when cooked in a neutral environment, plus 14% when cooked in an acidic environment. Cooking time: 45 minutes. Ethan slowly lowered his handful back into the bag. Plus 14% resistance to dark magic. Made from rice. From ordinary rice that had been lying around in the penal detachment's storeroom and that no one was interested in, because it came from demonic lands and everyone was afraid to eat it. The third bag. Wild garlic. Semi-dry, but alive. The taste of truth. Antibacterial effect. Anti-parasitic effect. When simmered for a long time with bone broth, it grants a +6 bonus to total regeneration for 12 hours. On the bottom shelf stood a basket of half-rotten beets. The taste of truth. Antiseptic properties when fermented. Iron. Folic acid. When properly prepared, it grants a +4 bonus to endurance for 8 hours. Bones were lying next to the basket. 3 days old, yellowish, with remnants of meat and tendons. Someone had tossed them here after lunch and forgotten about them. Ethan picked up a bone. He sniffed it. Not rotten, on the verge, but still usable. The collagen in the joints hadn't broken down yet. 8 hours of simmering at 70 degrees, and these bones would provide the base for a broth that, in a past life, had been sold in a restaurant for $80 a bowl. Ethan sat down on the pantry floor. He took the herbs he'd gathered along the way out of his bag. He laid them out in front of him. Thyme, silverweed, wolfsbane, spiderweb mushroom, plus whatever was in the pantry. Beets, bones, garlic, black rice. He closed his eyes and began to plan the menu. Not in a system window, in his head, just as he'd done every morning for 13 years straight in Ure. The base, bone broth. 8 hours. Temperature no higher than 80 degrees. Skim the foam every 30 minutes. Thyme is added 40 minutes before it's done. Garlic is crushed and added to the cold broth at the start of cooking. Beets are diced into small cubes and fermented separately in a clay bowl with a handful of black rice at the bottom. An acidic environment for the rice. Wolfsbane is neutralized by boiling an acid. The spider mushroom is simmered separately at 60 degrees for 3 hours. It is then added to the main broth. The finished dish, a thick, dark soup with the aroma of thyme and garlic. Intended properties: resistance to dark magic, regeneration, night vision, antibacterial effect, all in one bowl. Ethan opened his eyes. He stood up. He took off his shirt and tied it around his waist. He rolled up his sleeves. He looked at the rusty cauldron. At the Ure restaurant, he had $200,000 worth of equipment. Ovens with digital temperature controls, copper saucepans from France, Damascus steel knives, thermometers accurate to 1/10 of a degree. Here, he had a rusty cauldron and a stone hearth. He smirked. So, a rusty cauldron and a stone hearth. He started with the hearth. He took apart the masonry. He cleaned out the chimney with a piece of rag wrapped around a stick. He put it back together. He sealed the cracks with clay from the riverbank. Dorn stood in the doorway watching. Ethan paid no attention to him. He scrubbed the cauldron with sand and water from the well. Then he rubbed it down with oil. He found 2 flat stones behind the barracks. One became a cutting board. He adapted the other for sharpening his knife. 20 minutes later, the knife was sharp. Not perfect, but sharp enough to cut the beets into even, small cubes. He worked for 8 hours straight, without stopping, without food, without water. He forgot that his body was 16 years old and weak. At some point his hands began to shake, but he gritted his teeth and kept going. It felt familiar. Back in Ure, before important banquets, he'd worked 20-hour shifts without leaving the kitchen. The broth came to a boil after an hour. Ethan turned the heat down to low. He went to the well and drew some water. He returned. He skimmed off the foam. He added garlic. 2 hours later, the kitchen began to smell, not of rot, not of mold, of food, real, hot food. May was the first to appear. She leaned over the roof of the barracks and sniffed the air. Her eyes went wide. She jumped down and walked over to the kitchen door. She stood there. She sniffed. She smiled so widely that her fangs were visible. Half-elven fangs are small and sharp. She said it smelled like when she was a child. Ethan didn't ask what it smelled like when she was a child. He'd find out later. Right now, he was busy. 4 hours later, the smell had spread throughout the camp. A soldier with an axe came and stood in the doorway. A guy with a spear peeked out of the barracks. Hannah tore herself away from Garen and looked toward the kitchen. Even Lyra stopped cleaning her arrows and turned her head. Ethan was cooking, skimming off the foam, stirring, tasting. He grimaced. He added more. He tasted it again. The system panel hung before his eyes. Harmony of ingredients. Resonance. 34, 41, 52. The scale crept upward slowly. He added time. 58. He let the broth rest for 10 minutes off the heat. 63. He added fermented beets with rice. 67. He added neutralized wolf root. 71. The panel flashed green. Resonance 70+. The dish gained status, a temporary buff. Ethan nodded. 71. For a first course made from scraps in a rusty cauldron, that was good. But not good enough. He thought of Garen, his gray face, the green spot under his bandage, arrow poisoning. Hannah can't cure him, not enough mana. Ethan poured some of the broth into a clay bowl, a cracked one, the only clean one. He looked at the broth. He looked at the spider mushroom that had been simmering separately for 3 hours already. He took a sample of the mushroom. The taste of truth. The toxins had broken down by 98%. Safe. Hidden property revealed. Neutralizes organically derived poisons upon entering the body. 73% effective. He added the mushroom to the bowl for Garen, stirred it, tasted it. The resonance for this portion is rising. 74, 79, 83. Ethan took some willow bark out of his bag. He hadn't collected it along the way. He'd sent May to get it 2 hours ago. The girl brought back a whole bunch and received a piece of dried bread smeared with garlic oil as a reward. She ate it in 4 seconds. Ethan ground the willow bark into a powder between some stones. Aspirin. Fever reducer. Anti-inflammatory. In his past life, every medical student knew this. Here, no one knew about it. He added a pinch to Garen's bowl. Resonance. 87. The panel lit up. Meal for one activated. Dish prepared according to the specific eater's condition. Bonus. Plus 30 to resonance cap. Current resonance, 87. Eater. Garen. Spearman. Expected effects, blood purification. Poison neutralization. Tissue regeneration. Multiplier 3. Ethan took the bowl, still warm from the hearth, and carried it across the courtyard to the barracks where Garen lay. Garen lay on a straw mattress in the corner of the barracks. His eyes were closed. His breathing was raspy and ragged. Every breath came with a whistle. His skin was gray as wet ash. A green stain beneath the bandage on his shoulder had spread to his collarbone. Hannah was kneeling beside him, her hands resting on his chest. The glow of mana was barely noticeable, like a candle in the wind. She looked up at Ethan. Her eyes were tired, red from lack of sleep. She hadn't slept for 2 days. She'd been trying to keep the poison from spreading. She wasn't healing him, just slowing it down. She didn't have enough mana to heal him. She told Ethan he'd better leave, that Garen had about 6 hours left. maybe 8, that she'd done everything she could. Ethan sat down beside her. He set the bowl on the floor next to the mattress. Steam rose from the broth in a thin wisp. The scent filled the corner of the barracks. Thyme, garlic, something else. Something that made Hannah suddenly blink and sniff the air. She asked what it was. Ethan said it was dinner. She said Garen couldn't eat. He'd been unconscious for 2 days. Ethan lifted Garen by the shoulders. He was heavy, 90 kilograms of muscle and bone. Ethan's 16-year-old body creaked with the effort. He leaned Garen against the wall. The spearman's head fell onto his chest. Ethan picked up the bowl, scooped up a spoonful of broth, and brought it to Garen's lips. He pried his mouth open with his fingers. He poured it in. Garen coughed. The broth ran down his chin. Ethan wiped it off and poured some more. Hannah watched. She wanted to say that it was useless, that the poison from a demonic arrow couldn't be cured with food, that in her 12 years of service, she'd seen B-rank knights die from this poison and A-rank healers unable to do about it. But the smell of the broth made her fall silent. Something about that smell was off. Off in a good way. As if the air had become cleaner. As if the room had grown warmer. The third sip. Garen swallowed it himself, without help. The fourth. His throat moved. The fifth. He opened his eyes, cloudy, yellow from the poison, but open. He looked at Ethan, didn't recognize him, looked at the bowl. His hand twitched, reached for the bowl. Ethan handed it to him. Garen clutched the bowl with both hands, the large hands of a spearman, hands that had held a spear for 12 years. Now they were shaking so much that the broth was sloshing over the edge. He raised the bowl to his mouth and began to drink. The panel before Ethan's eyes flashed. Plate for the one activated. Resonance 87. Eater. Garen. Spearman. Status. Blood purification. Regeneration multiplier 3. Gratitude scale 0, 4, 9, 14, 18. The numbers jumped with every sip. Garen finished drinking. He set the bowl on his lap. He looked at his hands. They had stopped trembling. The green spot under the bandage had faded. It hadn't disappeared, but it had turned from dark green to light green. It had stopped spreading. Garen raised his head. He looked at Ethan. His eyes were wet. He said he hadn't eaten hot soup in 6 weeks, not since he'd been transferred to the penal squad. 6 weeks on dry bread and cold water. 6 weeks of cold, pain, and pus under the bandage. And now, a bowl of soup. Warm. He began to cry. Quietly. Silently. Tears simply rolled down his gray cheeks, leaving pale trails. Hannah pressed her palms to her mouth. She could feel it. Her healing senses told her that the poison was receding, that tissue regeneration had tripled, that Garen's temperature had dropped by 2 degrees in the last 3 minutes. It was impossible. She'd been treating him for 2 days with no results, and this kid, a chef class student, had cooked a bowl of soup, and the poison had begun to recede. She looked at Ethan with new eyes. He noticed. He didn't explain. He stood up. He walked out. He returned to the cauldron. The stew for the others was ready. Resonance 71. Not as high as for Garen. Mass cooking. The system's ceiling was 60, but he reached 71 thanks to the quality of his ingredient preparation. Earthly knowledge provided a bonus the system didn't account for. He ladled the soup into bowls. 3 bowls. That was all there was. So, 3 rounds. First, he called Dorn and the soldier with the axe. His name was Berg. They sat down at the table. Dorn looked into his bowl. Dark, thick broth. Pieces of beet. Grains of black rice. A sprig of thyme on top for garnish. Dorn grunted. He said it looked nice. Berg didn't wait. He lifted the bowl and started drinking. He froze. He set the bowl down. He looked at the contents. He looked at Ethan. His eyes widened. He said quietly that it was the best thing he'd ever eaten in his life. Not just on the border, in his whole life. Dorn took a taste. 1 spoonful. He set the spoon down on the table. He was silent for a long time. Then he ate the whole bowl in one go and asked for more. Ethan poured him another serving. The system panel displayed, temporary status buff activated for Eater Dorn, stamina +8, resistance to dark magic +14, night vision +9, regeneration +6, duration 12 hours. Ethan read it and suppressed a smile. It was working. Second shift, the guy with the spear. His name was Ren, a quiet boy. He ate in silence. After the third spoonful, his eyes lit up. He looked at his hands, clenched his fists, unclenched them, clenched them again. He said he felt strange, as if he'd slept soundly for the first time in a month. Third shift, Hannah. She came out from Garen's place and sat down at the table. Ethan set a bowl in front of her. She picked up a spoon. Her hand trembled with exhaustion. She took a sip, closed her eyes, sat like that for a long time. Then she opened them. Her eyes were wet. She said the broth restores mana. She could feel her reserves filling up, slowly but surely. She asked how that was possible. Ethan shrugged. He said that good broth takes 8 hours to simmer. That's all. Lyra didn't show up. She was sitting against the wall of the barracks, chewing on a piece of hardtack, pointedly. Ethan didn't press the issue. He knew people like that. The restaurant had regulars who came 3 months in a row and ordered nothing but water. Then they'd try one dish and couldn't stop after that. Lyra would come. May was eating on the roof. Ethan passed her a bowl through the window. She ate everything, licked the bowl clean, jumped down, ran over to Ethan. She hung onto his arm. She said he was a magician, that she hadn't eaten anything tasty since she was 5, that her tummy felt warm and she wanted to sleep. Ethan took her off his arm and told her to go to sleep. She ran off. Yuki was the last to show up. She stood in the kitchen doorway, quietly, like a shadow. Ethan didn't notice her until he turned. She was looking at him with huge eyes, not at the bowl, at his hands, at the way he held the knife, the way he washed the pot, the way he put away the leftovers. She watched the way an apprentice chef watches a master. Ethan recognized that look. He'd had that same look himself when, at 21, he first stepped into Masahiro Tanaka's kitchen in Tokyo and saw the 70-year-old man carve that chicken in a single motion. He set the bowl on the edge of the table. He stepped back. Yuki approached. She took the bowl. She sniffed it. Her eyes fluttered. She sat down right on the floor by the table and began to eat, slowly, spoonful by spoonful. After each spoonful, she would pause for a second, as if she were listening, as if she were remembering something. She finished eating. She set the bowl on the table. She looked at Ethan. Then she sat down next to the hearth. She didn't leave. She stayed. Ethan was washing the pot. Yuki sat beside him. Silence, just the crackling of the coals. Dorn appeared in the doorway. He stood leaning against the doorframe and looked at Ethan for a long time. Then he walked over. He put his hand on Ethan's shoulder, a heavy hand, the hand of a veteran who had buried 3 squads in 12 years. He asked quietly, "Kid, who are you, really?" Ethan wiped his hands on a rag. He looked at Dorn. He smiled. He said he was the captain's cook, just a cook, and he asked what they'd be having for dinner tomorrow. Dorn withdrew his hand. He grunted. He shook his head. He walked away. By morning, Garen's wound had closed. His fever was gone. The green spot had vanished. He got up on his own, went out into the courtyard, stretched, picked up his spear, did 3 lunges, stopped. He turned toward the kitchen, where Ethan was already building a fire for the morning porridge, and he bowed, deeply, silently. Hannah stood nearby, looking at the healed wound with the kind of expression doctors have when they witness a miracle and can't explain it. The next morning began with a scream. A raven flew into the camp at dawn and dropped a scroll right onto the head of the sleeping Berg. He jumped up and nearly chopped the bird in half with his axe. Dorn unrolled the scroll. He read it. His face turned to stone. He gathered the squad in the courtyard, all 7 of them. Garen was standing on his own 2 feet for the first time in 5 days, still pale, but alive. Dorn said that in 25 days there would be a crown inspection. Count Walter Morn would arrive, in person. Silence. Berg spat on the ground. Ren turned pale. Hannah closed her eyes. Even May stopped smiling. Lyra said one word. Executioner. Dorn explained to Ethan. Once a quarter, a royal inspector arrives at the border. If a squad proves of no combat value, it is disbanded. Soldiers are sent on suicide missions behind enemy lines. Cooks are hanged for misusing their rations. Count Morn personally tightened the noose around 3 cooks last year. The quota: 15 demons killed per soldier per quarter. Squad number 7 killed 2 demons last quarter. Between all of them, 2 demons among 7 men in 3 months. Ethan did the math. 25 days, 7 fighters. They needed at least 105 demons killed. At the squad's current level, every battle with a pair of demons ended with one of the fighters getting wounded. The math didn't add up with their current stats, but they could boost their stats. He told Dorn that he needed full access to the storeroom, all the rations, all the supplies, and permission to go outside the walls to gather ingredients. Dorn looked at him as if he were crazy. Then he looked at Garen, who was standing on his feet and stretching his shoulder. Yesterday he was dying. Today he's doing lunges with his spear. Dorn nodded. For the next 3 days, Ethan slept 4 hours a night. The rest of the time he was in the kitchen or in the woods. May went with him. The half-elf knew the woods better than any map. She showed him trails the patrols didn't use, streams with clear water, glades with mushrooms, bushes full of berries that people didn't know about. Ethan checked every ingredient he found using the taste of truth. 9 out of 10 turned out to be useless, or dangerous, or both useless and dangerous at the same time. But 1 out of 10 yielded something. +4 to strength, +7 to speed, +11 to mana regeneration. Small gains, but small gains add up. On the second day, May led him to a lake 3 hours' walk from the camp. The water was a strange color, silvery, moon lake. The elves knew about it but didn't tell humans. At the bottom grew algae that May called moon tears. Ethan picked a bunch. The taste of truth. Moon tears, endemic algae, hidden property. When dried and then boiled in milk, it restores up to 40 units of mana per serving. Maximum compatibility with elven and half-elven physiology. 40 units of mana. Hannah used 30 units for a single full healing of a moderate wound. 1 serving of seaweed could provide her with more than 1 treatment over dinner. Ethan gathered as much as he could carry. May helped and chattered nonstop. She told him that her mother was an elf, that she'd left when May was 3, that her father had died at the border, that she'd ended up in a penal unit because half-breeds aren't accepted into regular units. She told all this cheerfully, as if she were talking about the weather. Ethan knew that kind of cheerfulness. He'd seen it in the mirror for 13 years, when you smile because if you don't, you'll start crying and won't be able to stop. On the 3rd day, he made her an elven pie. Not a real one, of course. He'd never seen a real elven pie. But he used moon tears, wild honey that Berg had brought back from his scouting trip, black rice ground into flour between stones, and berries that May picked every morning and hid in her pocket. He'd seen her nibbling on them in secret, little blueberries that looked like blueberries but with a silvery sheen. The taste of truth. Moonberries, the staple food of the wood elves. They contain specific amino acids essential for elven metabolism. A chronic deficiency in half-elves living in human lands leads to a constant feeling of hunger and weakness. Ethan read that 3 times. May had lived in human lands for 15 years and eaten human food that didn't provide her body with what it needed. She had been hungry for 15 years, not because she ate too little, because she wasn't eating the right things. He made a pie. Moonberries for the filling, rice flour for the crust, honey for sweetness, moon tears in the dough for texture. Resonance rose to 82. Plate for 1 activated. Eater, May. Resonance 82. Expected effects. Satiation of elven metabolism for 48 hours. Energy restoration. +12 to speed, +8 to perception. He called for May. She came. She saw the pie on the table. A small, round, golden one with blue filling. She stopped. She sniffed. Her expression changed. Her cheerful mask cracked. Beneath it was the face of a hungry child. She sat down at the table. She picked up the pie with both hands. She took a bite, chewed slowly, swallowed slowly. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. She ate and cried. Because for the first time in her life, she was full, truly full. Not just stuffed, but she'd received what her body had been craving for 15 years. She finished eating. She sat at the table. She looked at the empty plate. Then she lifted her head and looked at Ethan with eyes that held neither cheerfulness nor a mask, only gratitude, so quiet and so immense that Ethan turned away toward the cauldron because his own eyes were stinging. May's gratitude scale: 12, 24, 31, 38. 4 days and she was ready to risk her reputation for him. Not that she had a reputation to begin with, but the gesture counted. At the same time, Ethan fed the squad 3 times a day. Breakfast: black rice porridge with herbs. Resonance 65. Buffs were average but stable. Lunch: cold. Crackers with game pâté that Lyra brought. She didn't bring the game for Ethan. She brought it to camp because it was her duty as the squad's hunter. But before, the meat was roasted over a campfire until it was as tough as a shoe sole, and half of it went to waste. Now Ethan took everything. Bones for broth, meat for pâté, fat for cooking oil, offal for soup. Nothing went to waste. Lyra noticed this. She didn't say a word, but she stopped shooting right next to his ear. Dinner, the main meal. Soup or stew with the maximum resonance Ethan could squeeze out of it. Every evening he experimented. He added new ingredients. He adjusted the temperature. He adjusted the cooking time. He changed the order in which he added them. The resonance crept upward. 71, 73, 74, 76. Slowly, but steadily. By the 4th day, the squad's stats had risen noticeably. Garen had fully recovered, and his level had gone from 8 to 11. 3 levels in 4 days, just from food. Berg went from level 10 to 12. Ren went from 5 to 8. Hannah didn't level up, but her mana was now enough for 3 full healings a day instead of just 1. May got faster, so much so that Dorn asked her to stop sneaking up on people because Berg nearly chopped her head off with his axe when she appeared behind him. Dorn himself leveled up from 14 to 16. His one remaining eye could now see in the dark. He told Ethan that the last time he'd seen that well was when he was 20 and still had both eyes. Ethan took that as a compliment. Yuki was still silent. She sat in the kitchen every evening, watching as Ethan work. Sometimes she'd hand him a knife or a bowl before he even had a chance to ask, as if she knew what he needed. On the 4th evening, he placed a knife and a carrot in front of her. He didn't say a word. She looked at the knife. She looked at the carrot. Her hands trembled. She picked up the knife, and she sliced the carrot into perfect julienne strips. Thin strips 4 centimeters long and 2 millimeters thick, just like in a textbook. No, better than a textbook. Ethan froze. He'd only seen cuts like that from masters, people who'd spent thousands of hours at the cutting board. This girl was 15. She was silent. She didn't cook, but her hands remembered. He didn't ask. Not now. He just nodded and took the carrots for the soup. Yuki stared at her hands as if she couldn't believe they'd done it. On the 10th day, Dorn announced a raid. A village a day's journey to the north had sent a messenger. Demons had ransacked the granaries. The people had nothing to eat. The squad was to retake the village and destroy the demons. Ethan said he would go with them. Dorn said a cook had no business on the battlefield. Ethan said he needed to check the local supplies, that the village cellars might contain ingredients not found at the border, and that he would prepare lunch for the squad before the battle. Dorn was silent for a moment. He looked at Garen. Garen stood there with his spear, looking like a man you wouldn't dare spit in the face. 10 days ago, he was dying. Dorn agreed. The next morning, before they set out, Ethan got up before dawn. He lit the hearth. He took the best ingredients from the pantry. He cooked for 2 hours. Not just any old stew, a battle meal. The stew of rage. Double-strength bone broth, black rice, wild garlic, thyme, spider mushrooms, wild ginger root that May had found yesterday, pepper. Red pepper grew beyond the wall, in the demonic lands. Berg brought back a handful from his last reconnaissance mission. The taste of truth. Dragon pepper. Capsaicin, 240,000 units on the Scoville scale. Hidden property. When added to a hot dish made with bone broth, it grants the eater plus 18 to strength and plus 12 to speed for 4 hours. Side effect. A burning sensation in the mouth for 20 minutes. Ethan smirked. 240,000 on the Scoville scale. In a past life, he'd worked with Carolina Reaper peppers rated at 2 million units. This was like hot ketchup by comparison. He added the pepper to the broth. The resonance spiked. 72, 76, 78. He added honey at the end for balance. 79. A spoonful of fermented beets for acidity. 80. The harmony of ingredients indicated that the ceiling for mass cooking for 7 people was 60, but he surpassed it again thanks to his technique. He poured the soup into 7 bowls. He had made the bowls out of clay the previous evening and fired them in the hearth. They were crooked, lopsided, but each one held the liquid. 7 bowls, 7 fighters. Each received their portion. Lyra approached the table. She looked at the bowl. Dark red broth with pieces of meat and mushrooms. Steam rose from it. The smell was so strong that even she couldn't stand it. She had been eating crackers for 10 days. For 10 days, the smell from the kitchen had followed her all over the camp. For 10 nights, she'd woken up hungry and lain there staring at the ceiling. She sat down. She picked up a spoon, scooped up some broth. She looked at Ethan with an expression that said if he said a single word, she'd shoot him in the knee. Ethan didn't say a word. Lyra ate a spoonful. She closed her eyes. Her tightly pursed lips twitched. She ate a second spoonful, a third, a fourth. She ate silently and quickly, and when the bowl was empty, she set it on the table and walked away without looking back. But Ethan saw. Her eyes were shining. Lyra's gratitude scale. 3, 5, 7. Slowly. But it had shifted. The village was called Brenmore. 20 houses, 3 barns, a well in the square. Half the roofs had caved in. The walls were covered in soot, claw marks on the doors. The demons had left 2 days ago but could return at any moment. The village elder came out to meet them. An old man with trembling hands and cloudy eyes. He looked at the 7 fighters of the penal squad and said they had come in vain, that the penal squad wouldn't save anyone. That last time, penal squad number 4 had come to the aid of a neighboring village, and the demons had killed both the squad and the village. Dorn didn't argue. He unfolded the map and began position his fighters. Garen and Berg on the eastern outskirts, Lyra on the roof of the tallest house, May on reconnaissance to the north, Ren at the western entrance, Dorn in the center, Hannah with the wounded villagers. Ethan listened while surveying the village. No houses, no fortifications, cellars. He asked the village elder for the key to the communal cellar. The elder looked at him as if he were an idiot. He said there was nothing in the cellar. The demons had devoured everything. Ethan went down into the cellar. It was dark, damp. It smelled of earth and rot. Empty shelves, shattered barrels. On the floor was a puddle of brine from a broken barrel of pickles. Ethan crouched down. He touched the brine with his finger. The taste of truth. Brine. Age, 8 months. Lactic acid content, 4.2%. Hidden property, probiotic concentrate. When added to food, it boosts the eater's immune resistance by 22% for 24 hours. Compatibility with bone broth, high. Brine. A puddle on the cellar floor, 22% to immunity. Ethan removed the flask from his belt. He poured out the water. He filled it with brine. He searched the cellar for 20 minutes. Under a broken shelf, he found a handful of dried mushrooms that the demons had overlooked. The taste of truth identified them as mountain boletus, +5 to stamina when properly prepared. In the corner, behind a barrel, lay a sack containing something hard. Ethan untied it. A turnip, frostbitten, partially rotten, but the core was firm. Taste of truth. A winter mountain turnip. Its vitamin C content is 4 times higher than usual. Hidden property. When baked in ashes, it grants a +6 bonus to cold resistance for 8 hours. He gathered everything he could find. He climbed out of the cellar. May had already returned from scouting. She was pale. She told Dorn that there was a demon camp 2 kilometers to the north. About 20 of them. Low-level demons. Ranks E and D. But there were 20 of them. And the squad had 7 members. Dorn clenched his teeth. 20 against 7. With normal stats, that's suicide. But their stats weren't normal. 10 days of Ethan's stew had boosted each fighter by 2 to 3 levels, plus the rage stew they'd eaten before setting out, plus 18 to strength and 12 to speed for each of them for the next 2 hours. Dorn made his decision. No waiting. Attack first while the buffs were active. Ethan said he needed an hour. Dorn said he had 30 minutes. Ethan built a fire in the village smithy, the only building with an intact roof and a hearth. He set up a pot, filled it with water, and tossed in the bones from yesterday's broth that he'd brought along. Mushrooms. He chopped the turnip finely. Brine, thyme, garlic. He wasn't cooking a full meal. There wasn't enough time. He was making what he called express consommé at the restaurant, a quick, concentrated broth. 20 minutes over high heat, 5 minutes to let it rest. Strain through a cloth. Resonance, 58, 62, 64, lower than at camp. The rush was killing the quality, but 64 is still a boost. He poured it into flasks, a swig for each fighter before the battle. An extra bonus on top of the morning soup. The squad set out. Ethan stayed in the village with Hannah and the villagers. He stood by the smithy window and watched as 7 figures walked off toward the forest. 6. Hannah stayed behind. 6 fighters against 20 demons. He clenched his fists. A useless body. Class F. The stats of a 16-year-old boy who'd never lifted anything heavier than a frying pan. He couldn't go with them. All he could do was cook, prepare food and wait, just like in his past life. When he stood in the kitchen while the world went on somewhere beyond the restaurant's walls, his wife would leave, and he'd stand at the stove. His father was dying, and he stood at the stove. Life passed him by, and he stood at the stove. And here it was again. The stove again. Waiting again. He shook his head. No, not again. In his past life, he cooked for strangers who didn't care who was standing behind the kitchen wall. Here, he cooked for 6 people who went into battle with his food in their blood. Every point of strength is thanks to his work. Every point of speed was thanks to him. If they survived, it wasn't because he'd swung a sword. It was because he'd simmered broth for 8 hours and braised mushrooms for 3. This was different. He told himself it was different. The battle lasted 40 minutes. Ethan learned this later from Dorn's account. The 6 of them set out for the demons' camp at dawn. Lyra took up a position in a tree 100 meters away. May approached from the rear. Dorn, Garen, Berg, and Ren charged head-on. 20 demons, lesser ones, gray skin, black eyes, claws as long as a palm, 3 rows of teeth, each the size of a large dog, fast, strong, but stupid, and hungry. They rushed at the squad as a chaotic mob. Dorn met the first one with his sword. The blow sliced through the demon like butter. Dorn froze. In 12 years on the border, he had never once cut a demon in half with a single blow. And now his sword had passed right through, and the demon had split into 2 pieces before falling. plus 18 to strength. Dorn could feel it. Garen was wielding his spear. 3 strikes, 3 demons. He moved so fast that Ren, right beside him, could barely keep up, clearing the dead bodies out of the way. Berg hacked away with his axe and cackled. He said later that he felt like he did when he was 20, back when he could fell a tree with 10 swings. Lyra took out demons from a distance. Every arrow to the head. She didn't once. Her hands were unnaturally steady. A plus 12 speed bonus gave her reflexes the demons couldn't dodge. May came up from behind and cut down 3 before the others even noticed. Her speed, after the elven pie and her morning buffs, was such that she left a silvery trail in the air. 40 minutes, 20 demons, 0 casualties in the squad. Berg had a scratch on his forearm. Ren had a bruise on his ribs. That was it. 6 D and E rank fighters had wiped out 20 demons without a single serious injury. It was impossible. It was mathematically impossible. But the math didn't account for the Resonance 78 soup and the Express broth with Resonance 64, and 10 days of systematic nourishment that had boosted everyone's stats by 2 or 3 levels. They returned to the village by noon. Garen carried the trophy on his shoulder. A demon's horn, black and twisted like a ram's. He tossed it at the village elder's feet. The elder looked at the 6 bloodied fighters and couldn't believe his eyes. He said it was impossible, that the outcasts couldn't defeat 20 demons. Dorn said they had a good cook. The village head didn't understand. Meanwhile, Ethan was already in the cellar of a neighboring house. He was searching the village, house by house, gathering everything he could find. Dried roots, forgotten sacks of flour, a barrel of honey in the rafters that the demons hadn't gotten to, a jar of clarified butter. He loaded up the wagon he'd borrowed from the village head and returned to camp by evening with a 2-week supply of ingredients. System panel. Squad 7's first sortie is complete. 20 demons destroyed, 0 casualties, plus 200 recognition points. Current total, 280 out of 1,000. Squad stats. Average bonus of plus 8 to base stats from regular meals. Ethan was reading the panel while sitting in the kitchen. Yuki was sitting next to him. She was cleaning the mushrooms he'd brought back from the village. She cleaned them silently and carefully. Her movements were precise. Not a single unnecessary one. Ethan watched her hands and thought, this girl can handle a knife better than half the chefs in Ure. Who taught her? And why is she so quiet? The answers would come later. Right now, he had 15 days until the inspection, and 28 demons killed out of the required 105. Not enough. But he was on the right track. The squad carried out its first sortie and destroyed 20 demons without any casualties, thanks to the accumulated buffs from Ethan's food. Ethan found new ingredients in the village, including brine that grants a plus 22 bonus to immunity. The recognition points counter rose to 280 out of 1,000. There are 15 days left until the inspection, and at least 77 more demons need to be killed. The next 10 days merged into one long, endless day. Ethan would get up before dawn. He'd build a fire. He'd put the broth on to simmer. He'd prepare breakfast. The squad ate. They'd head out on a raid or for training. Ethan stayed behind. He prepared lunch. He dried herbs. He fermented vegetables. He experimented with new combinations. The squad returned. Dinner. Ethan washed the dishes. He went to sleep for 4 hours. He woke up. He repeated the cycle. His hands were getting used to his body. His fingers grew more precise with each passing day. Calluses appeared on his palms where the knife rested against his hand. Familiar calluses, in just the right places. His body was catching up to his memory. The system panel displayed the squad's progress every evening. Garen, level 14. He had been at level 8. He'd risen 6 levels in 2 weeks. His spear now pierced a medium demon's armor right through. Berg, level 15. His axe left cracks in stone. Dorn, level 18. His single eye could see in the dark up to 100 meters away. He said he could see better at night than during the day. May, level 12. She moved so fast that she sometimes disappeared from view for a few seconds. Dorn stopped trying to keep up with her and simply trusted that she'd end up where she needed to be. Ren, level 11. The quiet boy with a spear had become a quiet boy with a spear that pierced demons like paper. Lyra, level 13. She still didn't speak more than 3 words at a time to Ethan, but she ate his food 3 times a day, and her arrows now flew 200 meters without losing accuracy. Hannah, her level hadn't gone up. Healers level up differently, but her mana pool had tripled. 3 full healings a day had become 9. For the first time in 2 years, she slept 6 hours instead of 2. The dark circles under her eyes had faded. She smiled more often. The sorties came one after another. Second sortie, Northern Sector Patrol, 12 demons. Eliminated in 20 minutes, 0 casualties. Third sortie, a nest of lesser demons in a cave to the east, 30 demons. The battle lasted an hour. Berg had a gash in his thigh. Hannah healed him in 10 minutes. Fourth sortie, ambush. 15 demons attacked the squad on the way back to camp. May sensed them 200 meters away. Lyra took out 4 before the rest could reach the squad. Garen and Dorn took care of the rest in 5 minutes. The final tally for 10 days, 83 demons, plus 20 from the first sortie, plus 28 before that, 131. 131 demons killed. The quota was 105. They exceeded the quota. But Ethan wasn't letting his guard down. Morn wasn't just an inspector. Morn was an executioner. He wouldn't be coming to count demons. He'd be coming to kill. And no numbers would stop him if he decided the squad had to be eliminated. Ethan knew people like that. The restaurant business had its own executioners. Critics who came not to taste the food, but to shut down restaurants. Inspectors who weren't looking for violations, but for an excuse to issue a fine. You can't play defense against them. You have to play offense. Strike first. Not with a fist, with a plate. 15 days before the inspection, Ethan began preparing a dish for Count Morna. He didn't know the Count personally. He'd never seen him, but he had a lead. 3 days ago, the wind had carried a scrap of fabric into the camp, a thin silk handkerchief caught on a thorn in the fence. Dorn said that Morn's scouts had already been nearby, checking the approaches. One of them must have lost the handkerchief. Or Morn himself. Ethan picked up the handkerchief. He rubbed it between his fingers. He sniffed it. The taste of truth activated. Object, a silk handkerchief. Owner, a man, 45 years old, give or take 3 years. Traces, southern pipe tobacco, iron-based writing ink, sweat with elevated cortisol levels. And one more trace, faint, almost indistinguishable, lavender and honey. Ethan paused there. Lavender and honey. This isn't tobacco or ink. This isn't the scent of a man over 40. It's the scent of memory, a scent that has soaked into the fabric so long ago and so deeply that it has become part of the fiber. Someone once used lavender and honey near this person so often and so closely that the handkerchief became permanently imbued with it. A mother, a wife, a sister, who he had lost. Ethan knew this kind of scent. An old man once came to Ure and ordered an apple pie. Simple, no frills. Ethan made the perfect apple pie with 3 kinds of apples and vanilla cream. The old man tasted it and said it wasn't right. Ethan made another one, with cinnamon and caramel. The old man said it wasn't right. On the 4th try, Ethan asked who the pie was for. The old man said his mother used to bake apple pie every Sunday, and he was trying to remember the taste but couldn't. Ethan made a 5th pie, the simplest one. Apples, flour, sugar, butter. No fancy techniques, no frills, just like they used to bake in the villages 50 years ago. The old man took a bite. He started crying. He said, "That's it." He left a $100 tip on the table and walked away without looking back. Lavender and honey. Ethan got to work. He sent May to get some lavender. She found wild lavender on a hillside an hour's walk away. He already had the honey, that barrel from the village of Brenmore. Mountain honey, dark, thick, with a hint of pine needles. He began experimenting. 3 days. Lavender and broth. No, lavender. Roasted with honey in a dry skillet. Closer. Lavender fermented in honey for 3 days at 30 degrees. The taste of truth revealed that during fermentation, lavender releases linalool, which, when combined with the fructose in honey, produces a sedative and nostalgic effect on the diner's brain. A nostalgic effect. That's what the system called it. A dish containing this ingredient evokes memories in the diner of the warmest moment in their life, of the person they loved most of all. Ethan fermented the lavender and honey for 3 days. At the same time, he prepared the base. Soup. Not a thin broth, not a stock. Soup. Cream of turnip soup with bone broth. Delicate. Velvety. Ethan strained the turnips through a cloth 4 times until the texture became like silk. He added clarified butter, a pinch of salt, thyme, and to finish, a spoonful of fermented lavender with honey. He tasted it. The full composition revealed the taste of truth. Resonance, 91, 92, 93. He added a drop of brine for acidity balance. 94. The panel flashed gold. Resonance, 94. A plate for 1. Condition met. The dish was prepared with the specific diner's taste memory in mind. Resonance bonus, plus 30 to the ceiling. Current resonance, 94 out of 100. Diner, Walter Morn. Expected effects. Restoration of repressed memories. Emotional catharsis. 60% reduction in cortisol. Permanent bonus. Plus 2 to wisdom. Ethan placed the pot of soup on the shelf. He covered it with a cloth. The count would arrive in 5 days. The soup would be waiting. That evening, he sat on the kitchen threshold and gazed at the stars. His hands ached. His back throbbed. A 16-year-old boy's body wasn't built for 18-hour shifts at the stove. But he was smiling. In his past life, he'd cooked for Michelin stars, for critics, for strangers with expensive watches and empty eyes. Here, he cooked for 7 people who sat down at the same table every evening and ate in silence and with gratitude. Here, his food didn't earn stars. It saved lives. Yuki sat down next to him, just like every evening, silently. She handed him a mug, water from the well, cold. Ethan took it, took a sip, looked at her. She was looking at the stars. Her huge eyes reflected the light. There was no emptiness in them. There was anticipation, as if she were waiting for something, or someone. Ethan didn't ask. He drank the water and looked at the stars, thinking that in 5 days he would either feed the executioner and save the squad, or hang from a rope next to the 3 previous cooks. In 10 days, the squad had destroyed 131 demons, exceeding the inspection quota. From a scrap of a handkerchief, Ethan deduced that Count Morn cherished a memory someone connected to lavender and honey. He fermented lavender and honey for 3 days and prepared a turnip cream soup with a resonance of 94 specifically for Morn. There were 5 days left until the inspection. Count Walter Morn arrived at dawn on the 5th day, without warning, a day ahead of schedule. Ethan was standing by the well when he heard the clatter of hooves, 4 horses, a carriage bearing the Morn family crest, a silver ear of wheat on a black background, an irony that made Ethan want to laugh. The family of the inspector-executioner bore an ear of wheat on their coat of arms. A man stepped out of the carriage, tall, broad-shouldered, ceremonial armor over a traveling doublet, black hair streaked with gray at the temples, a face like an axe, narrow, heavy. His eyes were gray and cold as the winter sky above the border. A woman stood beside him, half his age. Her dark hair was pulled back into a high updo, a long pipe held between the fingers of her right hand. Smoke rose in a thin wisp. Her eyes were green, intelligent, mocking. She surveyed the camp with the expression of a cat that had wandered into a mouse hole out of curiosity. Isolde Morn, the Count's niece, the icy countess, 22 years old. Dorn lined up the squad in the courtyard, 7 in a row, Ethan at the end. The Count walked along the line. He stopped in front of each one, looked them in the eye. Dorn, Berg, Garen, Ren, Lyra, May, Hannah. He paused in front of Ethan. He looked at the system token around his neck. Class F, Camp Cook. His lips twitched. Not a smile, a grimace. He told his aide to take note. Punishment Squad Number 7, Composition. 6 combat units ranked E through C. 1 non-combat unit, rank F, Class Cook. Status, to be verified. He said this the way one speaks of furniture to be written off. Dorn pulled out a report. He pointed to the column. 131 demons killed this quarter. The Count took the scroll. He read it. His expression did not change. He said the numbers meant nothing without confirmation. That any penal detachment could write down any numbers. He wanted to see the trophies. Dorn nodded to Garen. Garen brought out a sack. He emptied it onto the ground in front of the Count. Horns, claws, fangs, scales. 131 trophies. A mountain of shiny black chitin, knee-high. The Count looked at them. He picked up a horn, turned it over in his hands, sniffed it. Fresh, not fake, not bought from black market dealers. Real trophies from real demons killed with real weapons. His expression remained unchanged. He tossed the horn back into the pile. He said the combat value had been confirmed, but that wasn't all. He turned to his aide. He said he wanted to check the ration consumption. According to regulations, a 7-man penal detachment is entitled to a certain amount of rations per month. If the cook used more than the allotted amount, that's a misuse of rations. And misuse of rations in wartime is punishable by death by hanging. Ethan understood. Morn hadn't come to inspect the demons. He'd come to hang the cook. He doesn't care about the numbers. He needs a pretext. And he'll get one. Because Ethan really had used more than the quota. He gathered ingredients in the forest and in the village. He used herbs and mushrooms that weren't on any of the approved ration lists. According to the letter of the regulations, every one of those mushrooms and every one of those herbs constituted an unauthorized expenditure. Moore knew this. Someone told him. Someone had sent a raven from the capital, Rector Holven, the Silver Bread Guild. Someone who wanted the cook from Squad 7 to hang from a rope. Morn turned to Ethan. He said he wanted to see the kitchen. Ethan nodded. He led him to the 3rd barracks. He opened the door. Morn entered. He looked around. A rusty cauldron, a stone hearth, a wooden table, clay bowls, dried herbs on the shelves, bunches of lavender, sacks of rice and flour, jars of fermented vegetables, a pot of soup covered with a cloth. Morn walked around the kitchen. He opened every sack. He sniffed every jar. He took a pinch of dried spider mushroom. He rolled it between his fingers. He asked what it was. Ethan said it was a spider mushroom. Morn said that the spider mushroom was poisonous and not on the approved ration list. That using poisonous mushrooms to feed His Majesty's soldiers constituted poisoning, and poisoning soldiers was punishable by hanging. He turned to his aide. He told him to take note. Ethan said he needed a minute. Morn stopped. He looked at him. His eyes were gray, cold. There was no malice in them, no sadism, no pleasure in another's fear, only weariness. The deep, familiar, heavy weariness of a man who had been doing dirty work for so long that he had forgotten what clean work was like. Ethan walked over to the shelf. He took down the pot. He removed the cloth. Steam rose up. The scent filled the kitchen in 3 seconds. Turnip, honey, lavender, thyme, clarified butter, and something else. Something that made Morn flinch as if struck. His nostrils flared. His eyes widened for a split second. Then he pulled himself together. His face turned to stone again. Ethan poured the soup into a bowl. He set it on the table. He placed a spoon next to it. He said that before hanging the cook, they could try his final dish. It's a tradition. In Wieland's army, a condemned cook is supposed to prepare a final meal for the executioner. He made that up. There was no such tradition. But Morn didn't know. Or maybe he did, and he didn't care. He looked at the bowl. Velvety cream soup, light golden in color, a drop of dark honey on the surface, a sprig of lavender, steam, the aroma. Isolde stood in the doorway. She didn't take her eyes off her uncle. Her pipe went out. She didn't notice. Morn sat down at the table. He picked up a spoon, scooped up some soup, brought it to his mouth, put it in his mouth, swallowed. Silence. The squad stood in the courtyard behind the open door and watched. Dorn, Garen, Berg, Ren, Lyra, May, Hannah, Yuki, everyone. Morn held the spoon. His hand didn't move. His face didn't move. Nothing moved. 5 seconds. 10. 15. Then his hand twitched. The spoon clinked against the edge of the bowl. He scooped up a second spoonful, a third, a fourth. He ate in silence, faster with each spoonful, like a starving man, like a man who hadn't eaten in 20 years and suddenly remembered what food was. He finished eating. He set down the spoon. His hands lay on the table, large hands, calloused from the sword, with ink stains on his fingers. They were trembling. His face. The axe cracked. His eyes grew wet. His lips pressed into a thin line. He tried to hold it back. He couldn't. A tear rolled down his right cheek, then down his left. He wept. Count Walter Morn, Inspector of the Crown, executioner of 3 cooks, the man whom the entire border feared. He sat at the table in the penal battalion's kitchen and wept over an empty bowl of soup. Quietly, silently, only tears. He remembered. Lavender and honey, his mother. She baked bread with lavender and honey every morning. A little house in the south. The smell from the oven. Hands covered in flour. A smile. He hadn't thought of her in 20 years. He had forbidden himself to remember because he had done something unforgivable. The panel before Ethan's eyes. Plate for 1, activated. Eater, Walter Morn. Resonance, 94. Status, recovery of repressed memories. Emotional catharsis. Gratitude scale, 0, 8, 17, 29, 35, 41. The numbers jumped. 41. For a single bowl. Morn raised his head. He looked at Ethan. His eyes were red and wet. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He asked quietly who had taught him to cook like that. Ethan said no one. Morn stood up. He pushed back his chair. He walked out of the kitchen. He walked past the squad without looking at anyone. He approached the adjutant. He said that Penal Unit Number 7 had demonstrated exceptional combat value. 131 demons killed, compared to the standard of 105. 0 casualties. The unit is promoted to rank C. Rations are doubled. The cook remains on staff. The adjutant took note. Isolde looked at her uncle with an expression that Ethan couldn't read. Surprise, fear, and something resembling hope. Morn got into the carriage. He closed the door. Through the window, Ethan saw him take out a handkerchief. That very one. The one with lavender and honey. He pressed it to his face. The carriage started moving. It traveled 10 meters. It stopped. The door opened. Morn leaned out. He beckoned to his aide. He said something quietly. The aide nodded and took a small scroll out of his bag. He tied it to the raven's leg. The raven took flight, southward, toward the capital. Ethan stood by the kitchen and watched the raven, a black dot against the gray sky. He hadn't heard what Morn had said, but he knew. The cook from Squad 7 posed a threat. Elimination required. System panel. Crown inspection passed. Squad 7 promoted to rank C. Recognition points plus 800. Current score, 1,080 out of 1,000. Condition met. Hidden True class unlocked. Master menu available. Ethan blinked. 1080. He read it again. Hidden True Class. Unlocked. A new panel unfolded before his eyes. True Class. Culinary Archon. Rank. Undefined. Increases with recognition points. New ability unlocked. Master's Menu. Available recipes, 0 out of 347. The first recipe will be unlocked upon reaching 1,500 recognition points. Culinary Archon. Ethan read the words 3 times. Culinary Archon. True Class. There hadn't been a single one in 400 years. He didn't yet know what that meant, but someone did. Someone had sent the raven. Count Morn had arrived with the intention of hanging the cook for misusing rations. Ethan served him a cream soup with a resonance of 94, and the Count began to cry as he remembered his mother. The squad was promoted to rank C, but Morn sent a raven to the capital with a warning. Ethan earned 1,080 recognition points and unlocked the hidden true class, Culinary Archon. The evening after Morn's departure was the liveliest in the squad's entire history. Garen pulled a bottle of cloudy moonshine out of nowhere. Berg built a bonfire in the courtyard. Ren was smiling, and it was so unusual that May asked him 3 times if he was sick. Dorn sat by the fire, sipping from his mug in small sips. His one eye glistened, not from the moonshine but from something else. He'd been burying people for 12 years. 3 squads, dozens of names. Today, he hadn't buried anyone. Today, his squad had been promoted. For the first time in history, a penal squad had risen from rank F to rank C. May hung onto Ethan's neck and wouldn't let go until Lyra pulled her away by the hood. Lyra wasn't looking at Ethan as she did so. She was looking off to the side, but the corners of her lips twitched. For the first time ever. Hannah walked up to Ethan. She stood in front of him. Warm eyes. A weary smile. She said she wanted to thank him. He said there was no need. She didn't listen. She leaned down and kissed him on the forehead. Gently. Like a blessing. Then her face turned red from her neck to her hairline. She turned and ran back into the barracks so fast she tripped over the threshold. May giggled. Lyra rolled her eyes. Ethan stood there, wondering why his forehead felt hot. He was 34, as far as he could remember. His ex-wife had kissed him. Clients in Tokyo who'd had a few drinks at New Year's parties. A kiss on the forehead from a 19-year-old healer shouldn't have embarrassed him. But his body was that of a 16-year-old, and his body reacted in its own way. Dorn grunted. He poured Ethan a mug of moonshine. Ethan raised it to his lips. He paused. The taste of truth. 43% ethyl alcohol, fusel oils, 0.3% methanol impurity. Safe in quantities up to 200 milliliters for a body weight of 55 kilograms. Ethan sighed. He wouldn't even be able to drink this properly. The system analyzed everything he brought to his lips. He took a sip. It burned his throat. His stomach churned. The body of a 16-year-old boy had never consumed alcohol. He coughed. Dorn laughed. For the first time ever, Ethan heard the captain laugh, a low, hoarse laugh of a man who had almost forgotten how to do it. The campfire crackled. Stars hung over the camp. The 7 of them sat together. They ate. They drank. They were silent. They talked. Then they were silent again. Ethan looked at them and reminisced. In his past life, he hadn't had this. The Yurei restaurant. 18 hours a day. The kitchen staff rotated every 6 months. Trainees came and went. The sous chef drank and lied. The manager stole. His wife left. His father died. He didn't remember his mother. For 13 years, he'd fed people without ever sitting down at the same table with them. He cooked because of people, not for them. The kitchen was a wall between him and the world, a cauldron in which he hid. And he died alone, too, at the stove, with a spatula in his hand, making sauce for table number 4. He didn't know who was sitting at table 4. It didn't matter, didn't care. Here, he knew everyone. Dorn, who lost an eye and 3 squads but still gets up every morning. Garen, who nearly died from poison and now eats every meal as if it were his last. Berg, who chops with an axe and laughs because if he doesn't laugh, he might lie down and never get up. Ren, who is silent but quietly says thank you every evening after dinner. Lyra, who eats his food and hates herself for liking it. May, who ate her fill for the first time. Hannah, who slept soundly for the first time. Yuki, who is silent, watching and waiting. He was cooking for them, not from them, for them. And that changed everything. The celebration ended suddenly. Yuki grabbed Ethan by the sleeve. Her eyes were huge. She was pointing at the roof of the barracks. Ethan looked up. A silhouette, black against the starry sky. A human figure, standing at the edge of the roof, motionless, looking down. At the squad. At Ethan. Dorn saw it at that very moment. His hand shot toward his sword. Garen leaped to his feet. Berg grabbed his axe. Lyra had already drawn her bowstring. The figure didn't move. It stood and watched. Then it vanished. It didn't walk away. It didn't jump off. It vanished, as if it had dissolved into thin air. May dashed onto the roof in 2 seconds. Empty. No one. No traces. No scent. Dorn lowered his sword. He looked at Ethan, told him not to stay alone. Ethan nodded, but he didn't listen. 2 hours later, when everyone had gone back to their barracks, he was sitting in the kitchen, alone, finishing up tomorrow's broth. A habit. In Ure, he always prepared the morning broth the night before. Fresh broth in the morning is the foundation of the day. The door opened. Ethan turned around. A woman was standing in the doorway. Not from the unit. Tall, slender, a floor-length black cloak. The hood was thrown back. Her face was pale, beautiful. Dark eyes with a reddish glint. Black hair down to her waist. A crest on the shoulder of her cloak. Ethan looked closer. A crossed-out plate. An empty table. She entered, closed the door behind her. Calmly, without haste, as if she'd walked into a familiar cafe. She approached the table, placed 2 daggers on it, handles facing Ethan. A gesture. I'm armed. I'm showing my weapons. I'm not hiding them. She sat down at the table. She looked at Ethan and said, "Hello, Archon." Ethan stood there with a ladle in his hand. Steam from the broth rose behind him. He looked at the coat of arms, a crossed-out plate, the cult of the empty table. He looked at the daggers, then at the woman. She was waiting, calmly, patiently, like a cat by a mouse hole. Ethan lowered the ladle. He picked up a bowl, poured some broth, set it in front of her. She looked at the bowl. She raised an eyebrow. Ethan said that in his kitchen, they eat first, then they kill. The squad was celebrating a promotion to C rank. Hannah kissed Ethan on the forehead. Yuki noticed a watcher on the roof who vanished without a trace. That night, a woman bearing the emblem of the cult of the empty table came into the kitchen. She called Ethan the Archon. He offered her some food first. The woman stared at the bowl. Steam rose and dissipated in the air between them. She didn't move. Neither did Ethan. 2 people at the table, one with a ladle, the other with 2 daggers. The silence lasted 10 seconds. Then she picked up the bowl. She sniffed it. Her nostrils twitched. Her eyes, with a reddish glint, narrowed. She took a sip. She set the bowl down. Her expression didn't change. No surprise, no tears, no catharsis. She said the broth wasn't bad, that she could taste thyme and garlic in it, and something else that made the back of her neck tingle, but that she hadn't come for dinner. Ethan sat down across from her. He asked why she had come. She said her name was Nira, that she was the blade of the cult of the empty table, that the cult knew about him, that at the moment of the awakening, the tablet had sent a signal that was picked up by the Order's priests across the continent. The culinary Archon. For the first time in 400 years. Ethan listened. His hands rested on the table, calm. In a past life, he'd negotiated with suppliers who threatened to double their prices a week before the New Year's banquet. with inspectors who found an expired lemon in the pantry and threatened to shut him down, with a drunk customer who waved a bottle and demanded to be moved to a table by the window. The woman with daggers at the table in the rusty kitchen of the penal battalion wasn't the scariest thing he'd ever seen in his life. Nira continued. She said that 400 years ago, the last culinary archon had stopped the Crimson Tide. One feast, 10,000 soldiers, buffs so powerful that an army of humans destroyed 40,000 demons in a single night. The archon's name was Tarvos Kirin. He was the greatest chef in the history of Erdal. He could raise a person 20 levels with a single dish. He could cure illnesses that were resistant to magic. He could feed 1,000 people from a single cauldron, and each person received a dish tailored to their needs. The cult killed him. They burned all his recipes. They destroyed his students. They erased him from the archives. For 400 years, the order ensured that no chef rose above rank D. Ethan asked why. Nira fell silent, for a long time. Then she said that the cult believes in one thing: food makes people strong. Strong people do not obey. Disobedience leads to chaos. Chaos leads to war. War leads to famine. The cycle is complete. The only way to break the cycle is to control food. Keep people fed enough so they don't riot, and hungry enough so they don't resist. Ethan listened and said nothing. He recognized this logic. The Silver Bread Guild. Rotten food passed off as rations. Rector Holven and his cut from selling weapons to the penal squads. Count Morn and his inspections. It's all part of the same chain. Control through food, through hunger, through the fear of hunger. Nira said she'd come with a proposal. The cult wouldn't kill him. For now. If he agreed to 3 conditions. First, do not prepare dishes with a resonance higher than 80. Second, do not leave the border. Third, do not search for Tarvos's recipes. Ethan looked at her. He asked what would happen if he refused. Nira smiled, for the first time during the entire conversation. The smile was cold and sharp, like her daggers. She said that if he refused, she would kill him right then and there. Then she would kill the entire squad. Then she would burn down the kitchen. And in a week, no one would remember that there had been a cook in the 7th Penal Squad. Ethan looked at the daggers on the table. He looked at his hands, the hands of a cook, not a warrior. He could slice carrots into julienne strips, but he couldn't parry a blow with a blade. She'd kill him in 3 seconds, maybe in 2. He stood up. He walked over to the hearth. He lifted the lid off the pot. He stirred the broth. His back was turned to her, exposed, defenseless. He heard her shift on the bench. Her hand reached for the dagger. Without turning around, he said the broth would be ready in 20 minutes. If she wanted to kill him, she'd have to wait. Because the broth would boil over if left unattended, and he couldn't let the ingredients go to waste. Silence. Then a soft sound. Nira took her hand off the dagger. She said he was either a madman or truly an archon. Ethan said he was a cook who doesn't abandon his broth. For 20 minutes they sat in silence. Ethan stirred. Nira sat at the table. She finished her first bowl. Ethan poured her a second. She didn't refuse. The system panel flickered at the edge of her vision. Nira's gratitude. Nira's 0, 1, 1, 2, 2. She could barely move, but she was moving. The broth was ready. Ethan took the pot off the heat. He strained it. He poured it into bowls for the morning. He turned to Nira. She was standing by the door. The daggers were back on her belt. She said she was giving him 30 days. If, in 30 days, he didn't accept the cult's terms, she'd be back. And next time, there'd be no broth. She opened the door. She paused. Without turning around, she said the broth wasn't bad. The broth was better than anything she'd tasted in 28 years. And that was exactly why he had to die. She walked out. The door closed. Ethan stood by the hearth. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from exhaustion. 18 hours on his feet, the inspection, a holiday, a killer in the kitchen, a day that had gone on too long. He sat down on the floor, leaned against the wall, closed his eyes. The system panel hung before him, the culinary archon, the true class, the cult of the empty table. 400 years of hunting, destroyed recipes, slain apprentices, and him. A boy with a ladle in a rusty kitchen at the edge of the world. He opened the master's menu. Empty. 0 out of 347 recipes. He needed 1,500 recognition points for the first one. He had 1,080. 420 to go until the first recipe. He looked up at the kitchen ceiling. Soot-stained beams. A spiderweb in the corner. A drop of water fell from the ceiling onto his forehead. He smirked. In his past life, he'd been awarded a Michelin star for a 12-course tasting menu. The reviewer wrote that Ethan Rain cooked as if he were trying to stop time. He wasn't trying to stop time. He was trying to stop the emptiness. There was no emptiness here. Here was Dorn, laughing, Garen, bowing, May, hanging from his arm, Hannah, kissing him on the forehead, Yuki, waiting, Lyra, eating and getting angry that it tasted so good. 7 people at one table, his table. The door opened again. Ethan flinched. But it wasn't Nira, it was Yuki. She stood in the doorway in her nightgown, barefoot. She saw him on the floor. She walked over, sat down beside him, silently. She rested her head on his shoulder, a small, light head. Her hair smelled of smoke and thyme. She closed her eyes. A minute later, she was asleep. Ethan sat motionless. The girl slept on his shoulder. The coals in the hearth smoldered. The broth was growing cold on the table. In 30 days, a killer would come for him. In 2 months, Caspian would arrive with Celeste. Somewhere in the capital, Morna's raven had already reached its destination. Somewhere in the mountains, an army of demons was preparing a new attack. And he sat on the kitchen floor with a 15-year-old girl on his shoulder, thinking that he'd have to make breakfast tomorrow morning, because the squad would wake up hungry, and the cook had to be ready. Ethan spent the next 2 weeks in a state he would have called pre-banquet hell in his previous life. 4 hours of sleep, 18 hours of work, the kitchen, the forest, the kitchen, the field, the kitchen. He searched for ingredients with a determination that frightened even him. Every day he ventured farther from camp. May went with him. Lyra kept watch from above, from a tree or a hill. They didn't discuss it. Every morning Lyra would simply stand at the gate with her bow on her back and wait for him to come out. She didn't say she was going to guard him. She said she was going hunting. But for some reason, she always hunted in the same direction as Ethan. On the 3rd day after Nira's visit, something strange happened. Ethan found a clearing in the forest. An ordinary clearing with ordinary grass. But the taste of truth exploded with information the moment he stepped onto the ground. Object, soil, age of the organic layer, 400+ years. Traces of culinary manna. Concentration, abnormal. Source, unknown. Recommendation, dig. Ethan dug for 2 hours with his bare hands until May brought a shovel from camp. Half a meter down, he found a pot. Clay, blackened by time, sealed with wax. He pried open the lid. Inside lay dried leaves. 400 years in the ground and they were still intact, as if they'd been placed there yesterday. The taste of truth. Object, leaves of the ash tree. Age, 412 years. Preserved with Archon-class culinary mana. Hidden property. Main ingredient in the recipe for Tarvos bread. When steeped in boiling water, it produces an infusion that, when added to any dish, increases the resonance cap by 15 units. Incompatible with mass cooking, individual portions only. Ethan held the leaves in the palm of his hand, and his hands were trembling. Tarvos's recipe. The very same Archon whom the cult killed 400 years ago. Someone had hidden the ingredients. Someone knew that one day a new Archon would come and need what had been burned. System panel. Rare ingredient discovered. 150 recognition points. Current total, 1,230 out of 1,500. 270 points until the first recipe from the master's menu. Ethan put the leaves in his bag. He'll tell the squad later. Right now, he needs to go back and make dinner. That same evening, Isolde Morn approached him. He hadn't expected to see her. She had arrived alone, without an escort, riding a dark mare. She entered the camp as if it were her own home. Dorn grabbed his sword. Isolde raised her hands and said she had come to play chess. Dorn didn't understand. Ethan did. She sat down at the kitchen table, took out a chessboard, and set up the pieces. She lit her pipe. She looked at Ethan with her green eyes. She said she had information that was worth a great deal, and that she was willing to trade it for the answer to one question. Ethan asked what the question was. Isolde said that on the day of the inspection, she had seen her uncle crying. In her 22 years of life, she had never once seen him cry, not even when his sister, her mother, died. She wanted to know what was in the soup. Ethan sat down across from her. He moved a pawn. He said the soup contained turnips, honey, lavender, and bone broth. Nothing else. Isolde took a long drag on her pipe. She exhaled the smoke. She said he was lying. Ethan said he wasn't lying, that the soup was simple, but it was made for a specific person, for his memory, for his pain, for the scent he'd carried on his handkerchief for 20 years without noticing it. Isolde was silent, for a long time. Then she said her mother had died of an illness, slowly. She'd been fading away for 3 years. The doctors couldn't find the cause. Isolde suspected her uncle, but she couldn't prove it. She asked if the taste of truth could detect poison from traces on old belongings. Ethan looked at her. She asked calmly, the way one asks the time, or the weather forecast. But her fingers turned white from the pressure she was applying to the receiver. Ethan said he could try. He needed an item that belonged to her mother, something she wore all the time, something close to her body. Isolde pulled a hairpin from her hair, a long silver one bearing the Morn family crest, and handed it to Ethan. He took it. Taste of truth. Object, silver hairpin. Age, 30+ years. Traces of organic material. Sweat, sebum, hair. Traces of a chemical compound. Ethan read the panel and his stomach clenched. Traces of truffle toxin. A modified alkaloid of the amatoxin group. Source: black truffle soaked in belladonna tincture. Method of administration: microdosing in food over a long period. Effect: gradual destruction of the liver and kidneys. Mimics a chronic illness. Time to death with regular use: D, 2 to 4 years. Ethan looked up. Isolde was waiting. He told her. Everything. No sugarcoating. No beating around the bush. Truffle toxin. Microdoses. 2 to 4 years. Her mother had been systematically poisoned. Isolde listened. Her face didn't change. Her lips didn't twitch. Only her eyes. Her green eyes turned dark, like swamp water. She asked if he was sure. Ethan said that the taste of truth never errs. Isolde tucked the hairpin back into her hair. She stood up. She walked over to the door. She paused. Without turning around, she said that the information she'd promised was as follows. In 3 days, the Silverbread Guild would send a caravan to the border carrying poisoned rations. Not just rotten food, it's been deliberately poisoned. The rations are intended for 4 penal detachments, including the 7th. The poison is slow-acting. A week after consuming it, the soldiers will begin to lose their sight. After 2 weeks, they'll be weakened to level 1. After 3 weeks, they'll die. The official cause? A demonic epidemic. Ethan stood motionless. Isolde turned around. She looked at him. She said they were even now. Information for information. And that if he wanted an ally inside the House of Morn, he knew where to find her. She left. The hooves of her horse faded into the darkness. Ethan sat down at the table. The chessboard stood between the empty bowls. The White King lay on its side. 3 days until the poisoned caravan. 30 days until Nera's return. 2 months until Caspian and Celesta's arrival. Morn's raven in the capital. The Silverbread Guild. The Cult of the Empty Table, Rector Holven. All threads led to a single point. The cook who makes people strong. The cook who must be destroyed. Ethan picked up the white king. He placed it back on the board. Pawn forward. His turn. Ethan hadn't slept that night. He sat in the kitchen and counted. A caravan carrying poisoned rations in 3 days. 4 penal detachments. About 40 men. He could have warned his own detachment, but the other 3 didn't know him. They didn't trust him. They wouldn't have listened to a kid, a cook from the 7th. He needed proof. Tangible proof. Irrefutable proof. The kind he could present to the commanders of the other detachments and force them to throw out the rations. In the morning, he gathered his squad. He told them everything. About Isolde, about the caravan, about the poison. Dorn listened in silence. Then he said that Ethan might have been wrong. That Isolde might have lied. That it could be a trap. Ethan said that the taste of truth never errs. Dorn looked at Garen, the same Garen who had been dying from poison 2 weeks ago and had been saved by a bowl of soup. Garen said he believed the cook. Berg said he believed the cook. Ren nodded. May said that if Chef says it's poison, then it's poison. Hannah said that if there's even a 1 in 100 chance it's true, they can't take the risk. Lyra was silent. Then she said she knew the commander of the 3rd Penal Detachment, a woman named Velma, a former infantry captain stripped of her rank for insubordination. If any of the commanders will heed the warning, it's Velma. Dorn made a decision. Lyra, May, and Garen are going to the 3rd and 5th detachments to warn them. Dorn and Berg are going to the 9th. Ethan, Hannah, and Ren are staying at camp. Ethan has to prepare the antidote, in case anyone has already received a portion of the early rations. An antidote, made from soup. Ethan returned to the kitchen. He took out some ash tree leaves. He steeped them in boiling water. The infusion turned out to be a dark gold color with a scent that Taste of Truth identified as the aroma of pure culinary mana. He got to work. He needed a dish that would neutralize the poison before it took effect. Preventative, universal, enough for 40 people. Mass cooking, resonance cap, 60. With the ash tree infusion, the cap rose to 75. That would be enough to neutralize the poison if it hadn't entered the bloodstream yet. He cooked all day. 2 cauldrons. One was his own rusty one. The second he borrowed from a blacksmith in the village of Brenmore. The base, triple bone broth, black rice in an acidic medium, wild garlic, thyme, spider mushrooms 3 batches, each simmered for 3 hours, moon tears to restore mana, a ash tree extract to boost the ceiling, and a new ingredient he found 2 days ago, white iris root. It grows along riverbanks in the foothills. Taste of Truth. Hidden property. A universal neutralizer of alkaloid poisons when heat treated above 80 degrees for 90 minutes. 89% effective. He added the iris root. Resonance. 61, 64, 67, 70, 73. The ceiling. Mass cooking for 40 people. It won't go any higher. Ethan looked at the number. 73. That's enough. It should be enough. He poured the soup into 20 flasks he'd gathered from around the camp. Each flask held 2 servings. 40 servings. 40 people. Ren stayed behind to guard the camp. Hannah helped Ethan carry the flasks. They reached the 3rd squad first. Lyra was already there. Velma. A tall, wiry woman with a shaved head and a scar running across her entire face. She stood in front of Lyra, listening with an expression that made it clear she didn't believe a single word. When Ethan appeared, she looked at him. "Is this the cook?" she asked. Lyra nodded. Velma stepped up to Ethan. She stood right up close to him. She was a head taller than him. She said that if he was lying, she would personally rip his tongue out. Ethan handed her the flask. He said it was an antidote, in case any of her people had already received an early ration. Velma took the flask. She sniffed it. Her expression changed. She'd been fighting for 15 years. She knew the difference between poisoned food and safe food. She opened the flask and took a sip. She froze. She looked at Ethan with new eyes. She said that 4 of her fighters had received an early ration 2 days ago. One of them was already losing his vision. Ethan gave her 10 flasks, 5 detachments, 2 encirclements, 20 flasks. He hadn't slept for 2 days. When the Silverbread Guild's caravan arrived at the border a day later, it was met by 4 commanders of penal detachments. Dorn, Velma, the commander of the 5th, nicknamed the Bear, commander of the 9th, Old Man Hors. They stood in a line in front of the wagons. Behind them stood their detachments, 38 men, all armed, all staring at the merchants with an expression that made the horses begin to grow restless. Dorn demanded that the barrels of provisions be opened in the presence of witnesses. The senior merchant refused. He said that it was the guild's property until the handover. Velma drew her sword. She said the handover was cancelled. The merchant turned pale. He began shouting that this was a mutiny, that he would report it to the capital, that they would all be executed. Ethan walked over to the barrel. He opened the lid. He took out a piece of salted meat. He held it to his nose. The taste of truth. Salted meat, salt, and a thin, almost imperceptible layer of crystalline powder on the surface. An alkaloid from the amethoxin group, modified. The same composition as on Isolde's hairpin. The same hand. The same operation. He turned to the merchant. He said that the salted meat contained a poison from the amethoxin group. That a week after consumption, vision would begin to fail. Death would follow in 3 weeks. That this was the same poison used to poison Isolde Morn's mother 20 years ago. The merchant trembled. His face turned gray. He began to say that he didn't know, that he'd simply been given the goods and told to deliver them, that he was just a merchant. Velma struck him in the stomach with the hilt of her sword. He doubled over. He fell to his knees. She asked who had given him the goods. The merchant named a name. Magister Orwin Holt, head of the trade division of the Silverbread Guild and a direct subordinate of Rector Holven. Dorn exchanged a glance with Velma. They both understood. This wasn't commerce. It was politics. Someone high up wanted the penal detachments on the border with die off quietly and unnoticed, so that the demons could breach the wall, so that the crimson tide could flood the plains, and then the elite in the capital would get the real war they'd been preparing for all year. A war in which they could become heroes, earn titles, land, glory. And for that to happen, the border must fall. And for that to happen, the penal battalions must stop winning unexpectedly. Ethan stood next to a barrel of poisoned meat and thought about how, in his past life, restaurant politics had seemed to him the height of human baseness. The chef steals a recipe. The critic takes a bribe. The supplier slips in expired goods. Trifles. Here, 40 people were being driven to their deaths so that the demons could breach the wall and start a war for the sake of someone's orders. The scale was different. The essence was the same. System panel. Poisoning prevented. 38 lives saved. Recognition points plus 420. Current total, 1,650. The first recipe in the master's menu has been unlocked. Ethan closed his eyes for a second. He opened them. A new panel unfolded before him. The master's menu. Recipe 1 of 347. Tarvos's bread. Ingredients: moon grain flour, dawn water, salt from the tears of a mountain giant, leaves of the ash tree, honey from a 1,000-year-old bee. Preparation: knead at dawn, let rise 3 times. Bake at the temperature of stellar heat for exactly 47 minutes. Properties: permanent increase of 20 points to all base stats. Unlocks the hidden potential of the Eater class. Single-use effect. Ethan read the recipe 5 times. Permanent plus 20 to all stats. Unlocks hidden potential. 1 dish, 1 loaf of bread, and a person becomes what they could have become if the world hadn't broken them first. Over 2 days without sleep, Ethan prepared an antidote for 40 servings and distributed it to 4 penal detachments. The Silverbread Guild's caravan was exposed and intercepted. The merchant revealed the name of the person who ordered the poisoning, linked to Rector Holve. Ethan earned 1,650 recognition points and unlocked the first recipe from the master's menu, Tarvos's bread. A permanent plus 20 bonus to all stats. 20 days until Nira's return. Ethan decided he wouldn't wait. He gathered Dorn, Lyra, and Hannah in the kitchen. He laid out everything he knew before them. The cult of the empty table. 400 years of hunting the Archons. The Silver Bread Guild as their commercial front. Rector Holvin as a partner. Count Morn as a pawn. The poisoned rations as a way to destroy the border. There was only one thing he didn't tell them, that his true class was called the Culinary Archon. Not because he didn't trust them, because he was afraid. Not for himself, for them. Anyone who knows about the Archon becomes a target of the cult. But Hannah knew. She figured it out before anyone else. Her eyes widened when Ethan mentioned Tarvos, and she said quietly that now she understood why she'd been sent to the penal detachment. Everyone looked at her. Hannah told them. She had been a cleric at the Monastery of the Holy Flame, the youngest sister in the order. She treated people for free. Common folk, beggars, vagrants. The church forbade it. Treatment costs money. Free treatment undermines the authority of the faith. She was punished. She was sent to the underground cells for penance. There she saw a symbol, a crossed-out plate carved into the cell wall, and next to it, text, ancient, in an archaic language. She spent 3 nights deciphering it by the light of manna from her own fingers. The text stated that the cult of the empty table was founded within the Church of the Holy Flame 412 years ago, that its goal was control over food as a source of power, that the last Archon, Tarvos, was killed by the high priest himself, that the order keeps his skull as a relic in a secret sanctuary beneath the capital's cathedral. Hannah fled from the monastery the very next night. She was declared a heretic. She was sent to a penal detachment. But in reality, the senior clergy were preparing her for a ritual sacrifice. She had seen too much. The penal detachment was not a punishment, but a delayed execution. Ethan listened. Dorn listened. Lyra listened. When Hannah finished, the kitchen was silent. Then Lyra said that her father had known too. Everyone turned to her. Lyra stood against the wall, her arms crossed over her chest, her face stony. She said that her father, Captain Voss, had served on the border 12 years ago. He was an ordinary spearman, rank C, but he had a friend, a cook, a strange man who said that food could change the world. Lyra's father ate his cooking and rose from rank C to rank A in 6 months. Then the cook disappeared. Her father was arrested, accused of desertion, sentenced to death. The death sentence was commuted to exile in a besieged fortress without rations. He gave his food to his daughter. He died of starvation. That's what they told her. Ethan listened, and the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place in his mind. The cook who had elevated people to higher ranks through food 12 years ago, who had disappeared, who might not have been killed but sold. He looked at Yuki. She was sitting in the corner of the kitchen, as always, silently, but her hands were trembling. She was listening to every word. Ethan walked over to her. He crouched down, looked her in the eyes, asked quietly. That chef she knew, her teacher. He cooked just like Ethan. Yuki looked at him. Her eyes were huge. Tears welled up in them. She nodded. A single movement, up and down. Ethan asked even more quietly. His name was Tarvin Voss. Yuki's whole body trembled. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. A sound burst from her like a broken bottle, hoarse, broken. Her first word in 5 years. She said, Shifu. Lyra turned pale. Her hands fell to her sides. The bow slipped from her shoulder and clattered to the floor. She looked at Yuki. Tarvin Voss, her father. He hadn't starved to death. He'd been a cook. He'd been Yuki's teacher. He'd been the culinary archon of the previous generation. He'd been sold by the cult to Lord Isgarna. Lyra walked over to Yuki. She stood before her. Her lips trembled. She wanted to say something but couldn't. Yuki raised her hand, a small hand calloused from the knife, and took Lyra's fingers in hers. Lyra sank to her knees and embraced the girl. Yuki hugged her back. It was their first touch in 5 years. They sat on the kitchen floor holding each other. Lyra was crying. Yuki was crying. Ethan stood there watching them, and something inside him broke and mended itself anew. In his past life he had cooked to hide. Here, his food was drawing people out of their hiding places, out of silence, out of loneliness, out of the 5-year silence of a girl who had watched her teacher being killed and found a new one. System panel. Yuki spoke her first word in 5 years. Yuki's gratitude scale: 25, 38, 44, 50, 50. Max he had ever seen. Yuki was ready to give her life for him. She was already doing so. When the cult's watcher stood on the roof, she was the first to see him. She checked the roof every night. Every night she kept watch while he slept. A 15-year-old girl who neither spoke nor slept guarded him from assassins with her bare feet and huge eyes. Dorn stood up. He was pale. He said the situation had changed, that they weren't just a penal squad on the border, that they were at the center of something bigger than all of them, and that he wouldn't let his people be killed. Not by the cult, not by the guild, not by the rector. No one. He drew his sword. He thrust it into the table. He said that from now on, Squad 7 would answer only to himself, and to his cook. Hannah revealed that the cult of the empty table had grown out of the Church of the Holy Flame, and that Tarvos's skull was kept beneath the capital's cathedral. Lyra learned that her father, Tarvin Voss, had been the culinary archon of the previous generation, and that he hadn't been killed, but sold to Lord Isgarna. Yuki spoke her first word in 5 years. Dorn declared the squad independent. Nira arrived on the 18th day, 12 days earlier than promised. She didn't come alone. With her were 4 others in identical black cloaks, the cult's blades. At dawn, Ethan stood by the hearth cooking porridge. He heard footsteps, 5 pairs of feet, light, trained, almost silent. But his hearing had sharpened after a month on the border. Or maybe it was the leaves of the ash tree that he added to his own tea every morning. They didn't give him any buffs. The system didn't allow the cook to eat his own dishes. But tea isn't a dish. It's a drink. And the system said nothing. A small loophole. He didn't know for sure if it worked. But his hearing had become sharper, and his hands had stopped shaking in the mornings. Nira walked into the kitchen. The other 4 stayed outside. She looked different, paler, thinner, dark circles under her eyes. She hadn't slept. She said the cult had found out about the caravan, about the exposure, about the antidote. They know the Archon is active. They know he's growing stronger, and they're not waiting any longer. She said she'd been ordered to kill him now. Ethan stood by the hearth, with a ladle, just like last time. He asked if she wanted breakfast. Nira didn't smile. She pulled out a dagger, just one, not 2 like last time. She'd lost the second one, or left it behind. She took a step toward him. The door behind her burst open. Lyra stood in the doorway with her bow drawn. The arrow was aimed at the back of Nira's head. Behind Lyra stood Garen with a spear, Berg with an axe, Dorn with a sword. May sat on the roof, smiling. Hannah stood behind them all. Her hands glowed. Mana, a full reserve, 9 full heals, or 1 very powerful strike. Healers can do more than just heal. The 4 blades from outside were already on the ground. Ren stood over them with his spear. He hadn't killed them. He'd stunned them. A quiet boy with a spear that pierces demons like paper. Nira froze. She looked around. 7 people, all armed, all staring at her, all ready to kill. For the cook. For the F-class boy who'd arrived at camp a month ago, soaked in someone else's soup. She lowered her dagger. Ethan told her to sit down. She sat down. He placed a bowl of porridge in front of her. Black rice, honey, moonberries, thyme. He'd been making this porridge every morning for May. But today, the portion was for Nira. A plate for 1. He didn't know her pain. He didn't know her history. But the taste of truth worked both ways. The last time Nira drank the broth, the system analyzed not only the broth's composition, it analyzed Nira's composition. Traces of chronic malnutrition, iron deficiency, vitamin deficiency, traces of old wounds roughly healed, traces of poison in her system, microdoses, just like Isolde's mother. The cult poisoned its own blades, kept them on a leash, strong enough to kill, weak enough to obey. Ethan prepared porridge tailored to her body, an antidote woven into her breakfast, neutralizing the poison, replenishing deficiencies, moonberries for energy, honey for blood sugar, which she hadn't had enough of for 10 years. Nira looked at the bowl. She looked at Ethan. She asked why. Ethan said because she was hungry. She eats, but never feels full. Like May before the elven pie. Like Garen before his first bowl of soup. Like everyone in this world who is fed just enough not to die, but not enough to live. Nira was silent. For a long time. Then she picked up a spoon. She ate slowly. With every spoonful, her face changed. The pallor faded. The dark circles under her eyes lightened. Her hands stopped trembling. She finished eating. She set the bowl down. System panel. Resonance 88. Plate for 1. Eater. Nira. Status. Neutralization of chronic poisoning. Restoration of basic bodily functions. Gratitude scale. 2, 7, 11, 16, 22, 22. She's willing to risk her reputation for him. Nira stood up. She sheathed her dagger. She looked at Ethan. She said that the cult would send others, that she wouldn't be able to stop them, but she could buy him some time. She turned toward the door. She paused. She said that for the first time in her 28 years of life, she didn't have a headache. She walked out. Her 4 companions woke up. They got to their feet. They followed her out. Dorn watched them go. He said they would return. Ethan said yes, they would return. But not all of them would be enemies. That same evening, a messenger arrived, an official one, on a royal horse bearing the royal coat of arms, a scroll bearing the seal of the Northern Front headquarters. Ethan Verkin, rank, camp cook. Based on the results of the Crown inspection and the recommendation of Count Walter Morn, you are appointed as cook at Northern Front headquarters. Report to headquarters in 7 days. Bring your cooking equipment with you. Ethan read the scroll. He read it again. Cook at headquarters. Northern Front headquarters. There are generals there, thousands of soldiers, the strategic reserve, and a kitchen, a big one, with real equipment, with supplies, with ingredients. He could feed more than 7. He could feed 1,000. He looked at his squad, 7 faces, Dorn, Garen, Berg, Ren, Lyra, May, Hannah, and Yuki. 8. 8 people he'd been feeding for a month, who had become his family, his first real family in 2 lifetimes. Dorn read his expression. He said that detachment number 7 would go with him. All of them. It wasn't up for discussion. They left at dawn. Ethan stood at the camp gate and looked at the sign. 7th Penal Squad. Letters scratched with a knife into rusty iron. A month ago, he'd arrived here in a wagon, soaked in someone else's soup, with trembling hands, with 0 recognition points, with a class that 300 people had laughed at. Now he was leaving here with a C-rank squad behind him, with 1,650 recognition points, with the true class of culinary archon, with Tarvos's first recipe in his head, with leaves from the ash tree in his bag, with calluses on his palms in all the right places, with 8 people who would follow him because he fed them, not because he ordered them to, not because he paid them, because he fed them. Every evening, hot meals, with care, the way he hadn't fed anyone in his past life. They were walking south along the road toward the Northern Front headquarters, Dorn in the lead, Garen and Berg on the flanks, Lyra in the rear guard, May in the trees, appearing and disappearing. Hannah was beside Ethan. Ren was silent and carried the supplies. Yuki walked beside Ethan. She held a knife in her hand. Not a weapon, a kitchen knife. The knife of her teacher, Tarvin Voss. She handed it to Ethan on the second day of the journey, silently. He took it. Taste of truth. A chef's knife. Demonic steel. 15 years old. Previous owner, Tarvin Voss. Culinary archon. Hidden property. Increases the resonance of dishes prepared with this knife by 5 points. Linked to the line of archons. Passed down from teacher to student. Ethan twirled the knife in his hand. Lightweight. Perfectly balanced. The blade was as sharp as on the first day. 15 years, and the steel hadn't dulled. In Ure, his best knife had cost $800 and had dulled in 3 months. This knife was alive. It sensed his hand. It adjusted itself. Ethan made a test cut on the apple he'd been carrying in his pocket. The apple split into 2 halves, cleanly, effortlessly, as if the knife itself knew where to cut. Yuki was watching. Her eyes sparkled. She spoke softly, her second word in 5 years. Ethan. Not Shifu. Ethan. His name. She called him by name. Lyra was walking behind her and heard it. She didn't turn around, but her pace slowed for a second. The Archon's daughter, the Archon's student, and the new Archon. 3 paths converged on a single road. Northern Front was stationed in Haldern Fortress. Stone walls 10 human heights high, 4 towers, a garrison of 1,200 soldiers, stables, forges, a hospital, and a kitchen. Ethan entered the headquarters kitchen and stopped. 5 hearths, 3 cauldrons, copper, polished, shelves of tableware, a pantry the size of his old camp, sacks of flour, barrels of oil, bundles of dried meat, spices, dozens of kinds of spices. He walked along the shelves, touching things, sniffing. The taste of truth worked non-stop. Panels flashed before his eyes. Mountain saffron, +9 to perception. Black cardamom, +7 to mental defense. White pepper, +11 to endurance when properly processed. Demonic cinnamon, +15 to resistance to dark magic when simmered in fat. He stood among the spices, tears streaming down his face, not from grief, from professional joy. For a month at the border he'd worked with trash, rotten beets, a rusty pot, 3 bowls, one with a crack, and he'd squeezed a resonance of 94 out of it. Now he had copper pots, spices, oil, flour, meat, real cooking. He could cook for real. General of the Northern Front, Raven Court. An old soldier, 60 years old, 3 wars, a face of wrinkles and scars. He received Ethan in his office. He looked at the boy. He looked at the papers. Class F, cook. Recommended by Morn. He asked why Morn had sent him a cook when he needed swords. Ethan said that in a week, the general would understand. Court snorted. He said he'd give him a week. If the general didn't understand in a week, the cook would go back. Ethan bowed and went to the kitchen. The first dinner for headquarters. 1,200 people. Mass cooking. Resonance ceiling at 60. With ash tree infusion, 75. With Tarvin's knife, 80. He stood at 5 hearths at once. Yuki stood beside him, cutting, peeling, serving, without a word. They worked as a single, seamless unit. She knew what he needed before he even turned his head. May carried water. Hannah sorted the herbs. Even Lyra came and silently sliced the meat. Crookedly, not up to standard, but with a fury that the meat didn't dare resist. Ethan didn't correct her. Dinner was ready by sunset. 1,200 bowls. Ethan's stew, thick, dark, with a scent that made the soldiers freeze in their tracks. Resonance 78. For 1,200 people. That was impossible according to the system. The mass cooking limit was 60. But the system didn't account for the chef who had stood at the stove in a Michelin-starred restaurant for 13 years. It didn't account for the Archon's knife. It didn't account for the leaves of a 400-year-old tree. It didn't account for the girl who had spoken up for him. The soldiers ate in silence. 1,200 people. Not a single word. Only the sound of spoons and quiet breathing. Then sounds of a different kind began. A chair was pulled back. Someone stood up, then another, a third. Within 5 minutes, everyone was standing. 1,200 men were looking toward the kitchen, at the boy in an apron holding a ladle, and began banging their bowls on the tables. Rhythmically, loudly, like drums, like a military march, like gratitude for which there are no words. General Court stood by the door. He wasn't banging a bowl. He was holding it in his hands, empty. He looked at Ethan. His old face, lined with wrinkles and scars, twitched. He said quietly that the cook was staying. System panel. Dinner for the Haldern garrison. Diners, 1,200. Resonance, 78. Recognition points, plus 3,400. Current score, 5,050. Master's menu recipes unlocked, 12 of 347. Ethan stood in the headquarters kitchen. Steam from the pots rose toward the ceiling. Yuki stood nearby, a knife in her hand. Lyra stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and an expression that could almost be called pride. May was leaning against the doorframe, smiling. Hannah was crying quietly, her palms pressed to her chest. Dorn stood by the wall. His one eye glistened. He raised his mug, silently. Garen raised his. Berg raised his. Wren raised his. Everyone. To the cook. To the boy who'd been spat in the face and had soup poured over his head. To the F-rank camp cook. To the culinary archon. To Ethan. 1,200 bowls clattered on the tables, and amid that clatter Ethan heard a quiet voice. Yuki. She said the third word. Shifu. Thank you. The fourth. Ethan closed his eyes. The steam from the pots was warm on his face, like a touch, like a blessing. He remembered his death. The kitchen of the Yurei restaurant. 3 a.m, sauce for table number 4, a spatula in his right hand, pain in the back of his head, darkness. He died alone, by the stove, in an empty restaurant. No one came. No one poured him a bowl of soup. No one tapped a spoon on the table. Here, 1,200 people were tapping for him. 8 people stood nearby. One girl called him by name. He opened his eyes, looked at his hands, calluses, burns, cuts, a cook's hands, from 2 lifetimes. He smiled. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, it wasn't a smile of exhaustion, not self-deprecation, not a defense mechanism, just joy. He stood at the stove, but for the first time, he wasn't hiding behind it. He stood in front of it, facing the people, his people, and he knew that tomorrow morning he would rise before dawn. He would light a fire. He would put the broth on to simmer, and he would prepare breakfast, because the squad would wake up hungry, and the cook would be ready. He would always be ready. Beyond the walls of Haldern Fortress to the north, the sky was red. The Crimson Tide, the demon army, Lord Isgarn. Somewhere out there, the former Archon Tarvin Voss was being held captive, Lyra's father, Yuki's teacher. In the capital, Rector Holvin was weaving intrigues. The cult of the empty table was sharpening its daggers. Caspian Vale was polishing his holy sword. Celesta Ironheart gazed at the dull blade and thought of the boy she had betrayed. Isolde Morn was playing chess against herself and waiting for her move. Nira sat somewhere in the darkness, running her fingers over her throat, which, for the first time in 10 years, didn't hurt. Everything lay ahead. 1,000 soldiers to feed, 347 recipes to unlock, Tarvos's bread to bake, a wall to defend, a father to save, a demon to feed. Because hunger created the demons, and hunger cannot be cured with a sword, but with dinner. Ethan Verkin, camp cook, culinary archon, head chef of 2 worlds. He took off his apron, washed it, hung it up to dry, lay down on his bunk in the barracks. Yuki curled up on the floor beside him, like a cat. He let his hand hang down. She took hold of his finger, tiny fingers, warm. He closed his eyes. Tomorrow would be a long day. Tomorrow is always a long day. But tomorrow he would have 5 stoves instead of 1, copper pots instead of rusty ones, and 1,200 people at the table. He smiled in the darkness. He fell asleep. The broth for the morning was already simmering on low heat. Thyme, garlic, bones. 8 hours, just as it should be.